The Duke of Briar-fell was carried into his own house, as if he were already a burden to be hidden. Rain struck the tall windows of Briar-fell Park in silver lashes, blurring the bright squares of the gallery where candles burned, violins trembled, and county guests pretended not to hear the boots striking the marble below. Nicholas Ashcombe, Duke of Briar-fell, had left the house that afternoon on horseback beneath a sky the colour of pewter. He returned after dusk in the arms of 2 grooms, his dark riding coat soaked through, his lips drained of colour, one gloved hand hanging limp from the torn sleeve as water dripped steadily from his cuffs onto the floor. For one suspended moment, the music faltered. Then Lady Ianthe Ashcombe lifted her chin, pale and composed beneath her black lace cap, and said with the sort of calm that made disobedience feel vulgar, "Not the blue chamber, the north still room." The physician said, "Quiet is essential." No physician had yet crossed the threshold. Nell Trelawney heard the lie from the servants' passage with a stack of linen pressed to her chest. She was not meant to be there. Laundry maids did not hover near the front hall when house-party guests were present, and certainly not when a duke was brought home, half-conscious from a hunting accident. But the house had turned strange in a single breath. Footmen stared at the rainwater pooling beneath his Grace's boots. A young groom shook so badly he could not remove his cap. Lord Roderick Penmere stood by the staircase with his hand wrapped around the newel post, not stepping forward, not stepping back, watching Nicholas with an expression too measured to be grief. Beside him, Miss Gwendolen Penmere touched a handkerchief to her mouth, though her eyes remained dry. "The north still room, my lady," Mr. Cale, the butler, asked carefully. "It's stone-cold below the east corridor." "Precisely why it is quiet," Lady Arnott replied. "A head wound must not be overheated. I will not have half the household bustling about him with fires and foolish panic. Have him laid there. Send for Dr. Henslow again. No shouting, no bells, no crowding. Briar-fell must not become a theatre." The word theatre turned the watching servants into guilty furniture. They moved at once. Nell lowered her eyes as the men bore Nicholas past her. His face was turned toward the linen in her arms. Mud marked his temple. Rain clung to his lashes. There was a shallow tear near the shoulder seam of his coat, and from that seam, caught against the dark wool, a thread of green weed trembled with each movement. Pondweed, Nell thought before she could stop herself. Not meadow grass, not hedge bramble, pondweed. She had washed enough boys' stockings and stable coats to know the difference. The hollow pond road carried that black mud. The upper meadow did not. "You there?" Mr. Cale snapped. "Linen to the north still room, then back below. No lingering." "Yes, Mr. Cale." Her voice was steady because servants survived by making steadiness look like obedience. She followed at a distance, down the narrower corridor, where the music from the gallery became muffled by walls and rain. The north still room had once been used for preserves, cooling jellies, and storing jars in summer. In late autumn, it held the cold like a locked intention. Stone slabs lined the floor. Shelves climbed the walls. The air smelled of damp slate, old sugar, and extinguished coals, though no fire had been laid in that room for weeks. They placed Nicholas on a narrow settle, covered hastily with a folded blanket. The grooms withdrew when Lady Ianthe entered. She did not kneel beside him. She stood at the foot of the settle and looked at his wet coat as one might look at a ruined carpet. "Remove the boots," she said. "Leave the coat until the physician sees him. Movement may worsen the injury." Nell's fingers tightened around the linen. Wet wool could kill a man if chill took hold. Her father had said so during winters in Cornwall, when fishermen were carried in from storms, and every cottage knew that cold did its work quietly. "My lady," she began, then stopped when Mr. Cale turned on her. Lady Ianthe's eyes moved to Nell as if noticing a smudge. "Did you speak?" Nell dipped her head. "Only that the linen is here, my lady." "Then lay it down and go." Nicholas made a sound. It was not a word. It was hardly breath. But it scraped through the room and found something in Nell that would not step away. His hand shifted against the blanket. The glove was wet enough to shine. Lady Ianthe heard it and looked toward the door. "Mr. Cale, the guests must be reassured. Tell them his grace has been seen to and requires only quiet. No servant is to enter unless summoned by me." "Yes, my lady, and no fire," she added, "no unnecessary heat." Nell looked at Nicholas's mouth. It had taken on a faint bluish cast. "My lady, his coat is soaked through." The silence that followed was colder than the room. Mr. Cale's face hardened. Gwendolen, who had drifted to the threshold in a gown of pearl silk, gave a soft laugh that barely disturbed the air. How very touching. Laundry hands now give medical opinions. Lady Ianthe did not laugh. That was worse. "Miss Trelawney, is it?" "Nell Trelawney, my lady." "Then remember the first advantage of your position. No one asks you to think." Heat rose beneath Nell's skin, not from shame alone, but from the effort of swallowing an answer. "Yes, my lady. Go." They left him there, not all at once, which made it worse. Lady Ianthe paused long enough to arrange the blanket over Nicholas's knees, a gesture fit for any eye watching from the doorway. Gwendolen murmured something about informing Lord Roderick. Mr. Cale ordered the grooms back to the stable. One by one, the footsteps withdrew, and the house resumed itself above. A waltz began again. Nell stood in the servants' corridor with empty arms and listened to the music float over stone, while the Duke of Briar-fell shivered behind the still-room door. She took 3 steps toward the laundry stairs. She stopped. A maid who disobeyed could be dismissed without a character. A maid dismissed without a character could fall. So far, no one would hear the sound. Nell knew that. Every woman below stairs knew it. She also knew the sound of a man fighting for breath, because no one wished to be inconvenienced by his dying. She turned back. The still-room door had not latched fully. She slipped inside and closed it softly behind her. Nicholas lay half on his side now, his wet shoulder pressed into the blanket, his breath catching in shallow pulls. The room had already stolen what little warmth the journey had left him. Nell moved quickly, because fear became useful when given work. She stripped off the soaked glove from his limp hand, then the other. His fingers were icy. "Your Grace," she whispered, though his eyes remained closed. "I'm going to fetch warmth. You needn't wake for it." She nearly smiled at the foolishness of explaining herself to an unconscious duke. Then his lashes stirred. Not open, not enough, but some part of him heard. In the laundry-warming cupboard, beside folded sheets meant for guest chambers, lay several slate-warming bricks used for servants' beds in hard weather. One was cracked across the middle and wrapped in blue striped ticking, so the edges would not bite through cloth. Nell took it from the back, where cook would not miss it until morning. It had been warmed near the kitchen range, not hot enough to burn if handled properly, but strong with stored heat. She tucked it under her apron and hurried back with a basin, dry linen, and the kind of courage that felt exactly like terror. Nicholas had begun to shake, not a dramatic convulsion, something smaller and more frightening. His body made tight, helpless tremors under the wet coat. Nell set the brick near his hands, then stopped. A gentleman's coat was not hers to unbutton. A duke's body was not hers to tend without witness. But propriety had left the room when his family did. "Forgive me, your grace," she whispered. "It's this or the cold." Her fingers worked at the buttons. Wet wool resisted her. She eased the coat open enough to slide dry linen beneath the worst of the damp. There was no great wound that she could see, only bruising, a dark stain near the shoulder where the cloth had torn, and a swelling at the temple that made her stomach tighten. She did not undress him more than necessity demanded. She did not let her eyes wander. She folded duty around him as carefully as linen. When she guided his hands around the wrapped brick, his fingers failed to close. Nell covered them with the cloth and held them there. "Stay with the heat, your grace." The words came out before she chose them. Soft, plain, almost a command. Above them, the music swelled. Laughter followed, faint and bright, from the gallery where candles burned and ladies turned in silk. In the still room, rain ticked against the narrow window. Nicholas's breathing hitched. His head moved against the folded linen. For one impossible instant, his eyes opened. They were grey, unfocused, and full of a pain too proud to plead. He looked not at the shelves, not at the door, not at the ceiling of his own cold room, but at Nell's face. She froze as if caught stealing. Then his fingers tightened weakly around the edge of the blue-striped ticking. "Fire," he breathed. "No fire," Nell whispered. "Not yet, but I've brought what I can." His gaze drifted, but not before something like understanding crossed it. Not gratitude, not softness. Only the first stunned recognition that someone had remained. The door handle turned. Nell snatched her hands back and stood, heart pounding. It was only the draft from the corridor shifting the latch. No one entered, no one came. The house had accepted the lie that he needed quiet, and quiet was easy for those warm enough to enjoy music. Nell knelt again. She tucked the linen closer, placed the warming brick firmly beneath his hands, and rubbed life back into his fingers through the cloth. "You must stay with the heat," she said again, lower this time. "You must." His breath answered in a shallow thread. She stayed through the first hour, then the second. She changed the damp linen when it chilled. She listened for footsteps that did not come. Once, near midnight, Mr. Cale passed the corridor and paused outside the door. Nell held her breath until his steps moved on. Twice, Nicholas muttered words she could not catch, except one that sounded like pond. Near dawn, the rain thinned. The gallery had long since gone silent. The great house slept under its velvet coverlet of rank and secrets. Nell sat on the stone floor beside the Duke of Briar-fell, with her back against a shelf of empty preserve jars, her palms tender from the heat of the cracked brick, her apron creased, her cap slipping loose over one ear. She knew she had broken orders. She knew Lady Ianthe would not forgive it if she discovered the truth. But Nicholas's colour had changed, only a little. His lips were less blue. His breathing, though rough, had steadied. When his eyes opened again, they found her more clearly. Nell rose at once, stiff and frightened. "Your Grace?" His mouth moved. She bent closer, careful to keep the linen between them, careful to remain a servant, even in a room where no one else had remembered to be human. His voice was barely more than air. Who told them no fire? The question entered the cold room like the first strike of a match. Nicholas Ashcombe did not sleep after the question left him. He sank and surfaced through fever as dawn thinned the rain against the narrow still-room window. But some part of his mind remained fixed upon the same cold fact. No fire had been laid, no physician had come until hours after he had been brought in. No servant had entered except the young woman, sitting upright against the shelf of preserved jars, her cap loosened, her face pale with exhaustion, the cracked slate-warming brick still wrapped beneath his hands in blue striped ticking. He knew the laws of his own house. He knew how quickly Briar-fell Park could move when rank required display. If a duchess sneezed in the drawing-room, 3 footmen appeared with sal volatile, shawls, and hot tea. If a guest complained of a draught, fires were built high enough to make June out of November. Yet he, master of the estate, had been left in a stone room below the music with rainwater in his coat and cold working steadily through his bones. Who told them no fire? He asked again, though the words scraped his throat raw. Nell Trelawney stood so quickly that the shelf behind her rattled. Your Grace, you mustn't strain yourself. The contraction softened the command, but not the fear beneath it. She moved toward the basin, poured water into a glass with careful hands, and hesitated at the edge of the settle. He watched her remember every rule that said she should not approach him unless ordered, should not lift his head, should not meet his eyes. Then she set those rules aside because his hand shook too badly to reach the glass. Only a little, she said, if you can manage it. I asked you a question? Yes, Your Grace. She slid one hand beneath the folded linen at his shoulder, not touching more than necessary, and raised the glass to his mouth. Lady Ianthe said no fire. Water touched his lips. He swallowed too quickly and coughed. Pain cracked across his ribs and shoulder. Nell drew the glass back at once, slowly. Please. He might have bristled at any other servant for speaking so. He might have bristled at any person in his house. But the word please trembled with something that was not impertinence. It was the sound of a woman who had spent the night bargaining with death on his behalf and had no patience left for pride. He breathed until the sharpness eased. Where is Dr. Henslow? He came after midnight, Your Grace. He looked at your head and shoulder. Lady Ianthe stood by the door, and Mr. Cale would not let me remain. Her gaze flicked toward the warming brick. When they left, they took the lamp but not the cold. So you came back. Yes, against orders, yes. A faint, humorless breath moved through him. You confess treason calmly, Miss Trelawney. She lowered the glass. For the first time, surprise broke through the discipline of her face. You know my name? I heard it. He had heard more than that. Through fever, through darkness, through cold, he had heard her say, stay with the heat. No voice in the gallery had reached him. No family voice had anchored him. Hers had. Nell looked away first. Then I am sorry Your Grace heard it in such a room. Before he could answer, footsteps approached. Nell stepped back so quickly that the chill between them seemed to return. The door opened without a knock. Lady Ianthe entered with Dr. Henslow behind her, Mr. Cale at a respectful distance, and Lord Roderick Penmere filling the threshold as if grief had made him dutiful. Gwendolen hovered just beyond him, wrapped in mourning silk the colour of watered cream. Lady Ianthe's eyes fell upon the wrapped brick beneath Nicholas's hands. Nothing in her face changed. That was how Nicholas knew she was angry. What is that doing here? Nell dipped her head. A warming brick, my lady. I can see what it is. Lady Ianthe crossed the room and reached for it. Nicholas tightened his fingers around the blue striped ticking. The movement cost him. His arm barely obeyed, yet the small resistance halted her hand. Lady Ianthe looked down at him. Her expression warmed by exactly 1 degree, enough for witnesses. Nicholas, dear boy, you must not excite yourself. Dr. Henslow was clear. Heat may worsen inflammation. Dr. Henslow cleared his throat. He was a narrow man with nervous whiskers and a physician's bag clutched too tightly. Moderate warmth at the extremities is not always injurious, my lady, provided the head remains cool. The room stilled. Lady Yanth turned her head slowly. Dr. Henslow found the floor fascinating. Nicholas let the silence stretch. Not always injurious, he repeated. His voice was low, but every person heard it. How reassuring. Roderick stepped forward with an uncle's sorrow arranged across his heavy features. My dear Nicholas, no one wishes to distress you. The household acted under uncertainty. You were brought in insensible. I remember rain. Nicholas kept his eyes half-lidded, allowing weakness to disguise attention. I remember stone. Memory after a fall is unreliable, Roderick said smoothly. That is precisely why we must guard against agitation. If the fever takes him, the succession will be clean enough without every maid in the house inventing heroics. He stopped one word too late. Dr. Henslow looked up. Mr. Cale froze. Gwendolen's hand tightened over her handkerchief. Lady Ianthe's mouth thinned. Nicholas did not move. He did not even let his breathing change. Clean succession. The phrase slid into him colder than the still-room floor. Roderick recovered with a weary shake of his head. I mean only that the estate must not be thrown into confusion by rumor. Forgive me. I have been awake all night. Nell had gone very still beside the basin. Nicholas saw that she had heard. More importantly, he saw that she understood the danger of having heard. Lady Yanth moved between them. Miss Trelawney, you were told to leave this room. I was, my lady. And yet here you are. His Grace was cold. Gwendolen gave a soft sigh. How touching. Next, she will prescribe for Parliament. Nicholas turned his eyes to her. It was not much of a movement. It was enough. Gwendolen's smile faded. Miss Penmere, he said, if Parliament ever lies soaked in a stone room, I shall recommend her. No one laughed. Nell's cheeks changed colour, but she did not smile. That restraint pleased him more than laughter would have. Lady Ianth drew herself taller. This is precisely the sort of excitement I wished to avoid. Miss Trelawney removed the brick and returned below. Nicholas spoke before Nell could obey. No. The single word emptied the room of all polite motion. Lady Anne looked at him as though he had failed a lesson taught since childhood. Nicholas. The brick stays. Pain dragged at his breath. He forced the next words through it. And Miss Trelawney will bring broth. Mr. Cale shifted. Your Grace, the housekeeper can send someone more suitable. Did I request someone more suitable? The old authority in his voice was not strong, but it was alive. Mr. Cale bowed. No, Your Grace. Then do not improve upon my instruction. Lady Ianthe's gaze sharpened upon Nell. Very well, broth. Nothing more. And you will not speak unless His Grace addresses you. Nell curtsied. Yes, my lady. She left with the basin, and Nicholas watched the door close behind her. Only then did he allow his eyes to shut. He had little strength and less certainty, but he had one witness who had not been taught how to lie prettily enough to satisfy his family. The second time Nell entered, the room had been made presentable rather than warm. A fresh lamp stood on the shelf. Dr. Henslow had gone. Lady Ianth and Roderick had withdrawn to reassure the guests. Gwendolen had left a scent of violets behind her, too sweet for a room where damp wool and fever still lingered. Nell carried broth on a tray, her sleeves buttoned severely at the wrist, her expression composed. She had returned to being invisible as best she could. Nicholas found that he disliked the skill. Shut the door, he said. Not latched, only shut. She obeyed, leaving a narrow line of corridor light. Your Grace, Lady Anna said, I'm not to remain longer than necessary. Then we must decide what is necessary. She set the tray down. Broth is necessary, and honesty. Her hand paused over the spoon. That is dangerous below stairs. It is dangerous above them as well. She looked at him then, truly looked, not as a maid measuring how little of herself might be noticed, but as a person deciding whether the man before her was strong enough for the truth and weak enough to need it. He respected the calculation. "You heard Lord Roderick," he said. "Yes, repeat his words." Nell's throat moved. "He said, if the fever takes you, the succession will be clean." The sentence, spoken plainly, made the room smaller. Nicholas closed his fingers around the edge of the blanket, and before that, he mentioned Penmere debts in the corridor before he came in. I heard only part of it, something about the hollow pond road. Nicholas's gaze sharpened. The accident was said to be near the upper meadow. "Yes, Your Grace, but you do not think it was." A flush rose in her face again, not shame this time, but the heat of being forced to step beyond station. "I saw pondweed on your coat when they carried you past. Black mud also. The upper meadow is chalk and stone. You know the estate roads. Laundry knows every road that ruins a hem." That almost drew a smile from him. Almost. He was too tired for it to reach his mouth. A useful education. Not one usually praised, Your Grace. Then Briar-fell has been wasteful. She looked down at the broth as if praise were more difficult to hold than blame. He watched her lift the cup. His hand would not steady. She saw it, and he saw her decide not to embarrass him by noticing. "May I?" she asked. That small courtesy struck him with unexpected force. All his life, people had asked favors of his title, permissions from his rank, money from his estate, influence from his name. Few asked permission of his person. He gave the barest nod. Nell held the cup to him. He reached to guide it, and their fingers met around the warm porcelain. It was nothing. It was the kind of touch any nurse might allow, any servant might endure, any injured man might require. Yet both of them went still. Her fingers were work-ruined, warm from the tray, and very careful not to claim space beyond necessity. His were cold and unsteady. For one breath, the cup rested between them like a fragile treaty. Then she lowered her eyes and helped him drink. "Miss Trelawney," he said when he could speak again. "Yes, Your Grace. In the inner pocket of my waistcoat there is a small steel watch key." Her eyes widened. "Your Grace, I cannot search your clothes. My waistcoat is on that chair, not on me." He turned his head slightly toward the damp pile Mr. Cale had finally allowed removed. "The key opens my travel dispatch case. It is in my chamber, unless someone has been thorough. Who should have it? No one but me." She absorbed that. The room seemed to listen with her. "What do you wish me to do?" "Take the key. Hide it in folded linen. If I lose consciousness again, or if they prevent Mr. Armitage from being sent for, you will find a way to get word to him in Winchester." "A solicitor, my solicitor, Your Grace. If they find such a key on me, they'll call it theft. They may try. They won't try gently, no." His breath thinned. He hated the weakness that made the admission quiet. "If they accuse you, cite I commanded it. And if they say you were delirious." Nicholas held her gaze. "Then remember that I was not." She stood motionless, caught between terror and duty. He saw the exact moment she chose. Not because he was Duke. Not because he commanded well. Because she had already stayed once when obedience would have been easier. Nell crossed to the chair, found the waistcoat, and removed the small steel watch key from the inner pocket. She did not pocket it. She brought it back on her open palm so he could see she had taken nothing else. The gesture was so proud and so wounded that anger moved through him on her behalf. "Folded linen," he said, "third cloth from the top. Stitch the edge if you must. Yes, your grace." At the door, a faint movement whispered against the corridor shadow. Neither of them turned quickly enough to catch who had paused there. Nell slid the key beneath the linen stack just as the floorboard outside gave one soft creak. Somewhere beyond the door, silk moved away. Nicholas closed his eyes, not from sleep but calculation. Miss Trelawney. Yes. From this moment, do not be alone with Miss Penmere. Nell's hand remained on the folded linen. Her face was calm, but the calm had become armor. Then she saw. I believe she saw enough to be dangerous, and not enough to know the truth. That is often the more dangerous amount. For the first time since dawn, Nell almost smiled. It vanished quickly, but he saw it, a small, brave thing. Then, I'll be careful. Do not only be careful. He drew one difficult breath. Be believed. The words seemed to trouble her more than warning would have. She lowered her head and gathered the tray. At the threshold, she paused without looking back. You should keep your hands around the brick, your grace. The room is still cold. Nicholas looked at the blue striped ticking beneath his fingers. Last night, it had been heat. Now it was evidence that someone in his house had meant him to have none. Yes, he said, but not as cold as it was. By luncheon on the third day, the house had learned to speak of the Duke's injury in lowered voices and continue everything else at its usual volume. Trays went up to guests. Cards were sorted in the morning room. A footman carried hot chocolate to Miss Gwendolen Penmere, who had complained that the rain made the gallery melancholy. In the north still-room, Nicholas Ashcombe slept, in short, troubled intervals, with the cracked warming brick beneath his hands and the folded linen stack within Nell Trelawney's sight. No one had asked why the blue striped ticking had not been returned below. No one had asked because no one wished to acknowledge it had ever been necessary. That morning, Mr. Cale found Nell outside the still-room with an empty broth cup and gave her a look sharp enough to cut thread. His Grace's riding coat is to be washed before luncheon, he said. Lady Anth does not want damp wool stinking up the laundry. Nell kept her face still. Yes, Mr. Cale, and do not take half the morning examining it as if it were scripture. Soap, water, drying frame. You understand simple work, I trust. Yes, Mr. Cale, simple work, he called it. Nell carried the coat to the laundry with both hands, feeling the weight of water still trapped in the seams, though the accident was now more than a day old. The wool had begun to sour. A careful house would have stripped it from him at once. A careful family would have cut the garment away if buttons would not yield. She laid it across the long table near the copper tubs, away from the other maids, and bent over it with a brush in her hand. She did not scrub, not yet. The tear near the shoulder had widened where someone had pulled him from the saddle or lifted him badly after the fall. The cuff was stiff with mud. Under the fold where dark wool met lining, something thin clung like a dead insect. Nell lifted it with the point of a laundry pin. A thread, black, waxed, stronger than ordinary sewing cotton, with a faint slickness that resisted her fingertips. It did not belong to the coat, nor to the linen. It looked more like something used where weather mattered and friction must be endured. Harness work, perhaps. Saddle work. She wrapped it in a torn scrap of brown paper and tucked it into the small pocket inside her apron. Then she turned to the hem. There in the seam, almost hidden by mud, lay a small green strand of pondweed. Not meadow grass, not any plant from upper ground. Nell had not imagined it in the hall. She pinched it free and stared at the black stain beneath. Briar-fell mud changed from place to place. The west road gave red clay. The upper meadow gave pale chalk that dried almost white. The hollow pond road gave black mud that smelled of cold water and rotting leaves. Her father used to say, the earth told the truth long after men had corrected their stories. Nell folded the weed into the same paper, then looked around. Steam rose from the copper. Mary, one of the younger laundry maids, was beating sheets in the trough with more energy than skill. Neither she nor cook's helper noticed Nell standing over a duke's coat as if it had accused someone. Trelawney. The voice came from the doorway. Nell closed her hand over the paper twist. Miss Gwendolen Penmere stood there in a morning gown of pale lavender, entirely unsuited to the laundry and entirely aware of it. Behind her, the passage looked dimmer, poorer, and more honest. "Mr. Cale said you were here," Gwendolen said. "How industrious. Though one wonders whether you wash coats or interrogate them." Nell dipped a curtsy. "The coat is heavily soiled, miss." "Yes, accidents are tiresome that way." Gwendolen's eyes moved over the table. "Lady Yanth wishes it clean, quickly. His Grace must not wake to a house still, fussing over one unfortunate fall." "Of course, miss. And I hope you understand that a servant's imagination can be crueler than any accident." The words were soft. They were meant to leave no bruise anyone else could see. A weed becomes a clue, a stain becomes a scandal, a gentleman's kindness becomes an invitation. Nell felt Mary go still at the trough. Heat crept up her neck, but she did not look away. "I have no imagination above my station, miss." Gwendolen smiled. "How wise. You smell of wet wool and presumption, Miss Trelawney. Soap is useful for one of those." She left before Nell could answer, silk whispering away from damp stone and labor. Mary bent over the sheets again, pretending not to have heard. Nell did not blame her. Servants kept bread by knowing when not to witness. Yet the paper twist in Nell's pocket seemed to burn against her apron. By afternoon, Dr. Henslow had allowed Nicholas a different room for an hour while the still room was aired. Though no fire was yet permitted there, he had been moved no farther than a small adjoining service chamber with a narrow window and a chair placed near the settle. Nell came with fresh linen and found him awake, pale but clearer-eyed, one hand resting near the wrapped warming brick as if he disliked letting it out of reach. Mr. Brixham, his valet, stood near the door, grave and silent. Nell approved of him at once, because he watched the corridor more than he watched her. "The coat?" Nicholas asked before she had finished her curtsy. His voice was weak but no longer wandering. Nell glanced at Brixham. Nicholas followed the glance and said, "Brixham has served me since I was 20. If he wished me dead, he has had better opportunities." The valet's mouth tightened as if that was as close to humor as the room could bear. "Your Grace flatters my patience," he said. Nell stepped nearer but kept proper distance. "The coat has not been washed." Nicholas's gaze sharpened. "Why?" She took the brown paper twist from her apron and unfolded it on the small table beside the broth. Pondweed from the hem, black mud in the seam, a waxed thread caught near the torn cuff. Brixham moved one step closer. Nicholas did not touch the items. He looked first at the paper, then at Nell. That, more than anything, unsettled her. He did not look as though he wondered whether she understood what she had found. He looked as though he expected her to. "Tell me," he said. "The upper meadow is chalk and stone," she answered. "If your Grace had fallen there, the mud would have dried pale. This mud is from the hollow pond road, or somewhere very like it." "You are certain?" "Laundry knows every road that ruins a hem." The faintest change passed over his face. It was not quite a smile. It was recognition. and somehow more dangerous to her composure than mockery had ever been. You said that yesterday. I did, Your Grace. It remains a useful education. Nell lowered her eyes because praise from him had begun to feel like standing too near a candle. Warmth, after a life of cold corners, could be as startling as pain. Nicholas drew a slow breath. And the thread? I am less certain. Uncertain is not useless. It seems too strong for clothing, waxed, perhaps from tack or harness. Brixham's expression changed. Saddle girth thread may be waxed, Your Grace. So may repair bindings. Nicholas closed his eyes briefly. Tom was on duty in the stable yard. The stable boy? Nell asked. Yes, Nicholas opened his eyes again. He brought in my horse, Brixham answered. He was present, Your Grace, though Mr. Weller had him sent to the lower stalls afterward. Bring him quietly. Brixham bowed and slipped out. The room settled around Nell and Nicholas with the uncomfortable awareness of being almost private. The door remained open. The corridor lay in view. Still, her pulse marked each second. You should not stand, Nicholas said. She had not realized she was standing so rigidly. I am accustomed to it. That was not the same as saying, you are not tired. Servants are not often asked the difference. Then answer now. The directness took the air from her for a moment. She folded her hands. I am tired, Your Grace, but I am not sorry. His face changed again, not softened exactly, but stripped of some guarded layer. For staying, for the brick, for the coat, for any of it. You may become sorry before this is finished. Perhaps. Her voice almost failed, but she steadied it. But if I had gone back below that first night, you might not have lived to ask whether I regretted it. The words hung there, too plain, too bold. Nell felt the danger of them a moment after speaking. A maid did not remind a duke he had been helpless. A woman with no protection did not tell a powerful man that his life had rested in her hands. Yet Nicholas did not punish the truth. He looked down at the wrapped brick beneath his fingers. No, he said quietly, I would not have. Footsteps returned before the silence could deepen. Brixham appeared with Tom, a narrow-shouldered stable boy of perhaps 15, cap crushed between his hands. The boy's freckles stood out against a face gone pale with fear. He glanced at Nell first, as if she were the least terrifying person in the room, then at Nicholas, and nearly folded in half with a bow. Your Grace, Tom, Nicholas said. No one will strike you for answering me. Tom swallowed. No, Your Grace. Was my horse brought back from the upper meadow? Tom's hands tightened around his cap. They said to say so, Your Grace. Brixham closed the door halfway, leaving it still ajar. Nicholas's voice lowered. Who said, Mr. Weller, stable master? And the truth? Tom looked at Nell again. She gave him nothing but stillness. No command, no plea, only the space to choose. Hollow Pond Road, he whispered. The mare came in black to the hocks. Not chalk. I saw it. Nicholas did not move. And the saddle? Tom's eyes filled with dread. The girth was parted clean, Your Grace. Too clean, like it had been worried through before. I told Mr. Weller, and he said if I loved my mother's cottage, I'd learn what a fall looks like. The room went utterly silent. From far above, a piano began. Gwendolen was playing again in the gallery, light and precise. Each note falling through the house as if nothing beneath it could possibly matter. Nicholas's hand closed slowly over the edge of the blue striped ticking. Thank you, Tom. The boy blinked. He had clearly expected anger. Dismissal, perhaps worse. Gratitude confused him. Your Grace, you did well to tell the truth. Nicholas looked at Brixham. He is not to be sent from the house without my order. Yes, Your Grace. Tom bowed again, shaking, and Brixham guided him out. Nell reached for the paper twist, intending to fold it away. Nicholas spoke before she touched it. "Leave it," she paused. "Your Grace." "On the table, where I can see it. Someone might enter. Then they will see that the coat must not be washed." The command was quiet, but it carried the first true edge of the Duke he must have been before rain, stone, and betrayal had stripped him down to breath. Nell placed the pondweed and black thread on the table beside the broth, not hidden now, not yet safe, but seen. Nicholas looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Miss Trelawney." "Yes, Your Grace. If anyone asks why the laundry has delayed, send them to me." A foolish answer rose in her before caution could bury it. "You are in no state to receive angry laundry complaints." His mouth almost curved. This time she was certain of it. Then they had better not make them. The smile vanished quickly because pain returned, but its brief presence changed the room. Nell took up the tray. At the door, she heard Gwendolyn's bright music stumble over a note and recover. It sounded, for the first time, less like elegance than cover. Nicholas heard it too. His gaze moved toward the ceiling, then back to the evidence on the table. "They are playing very loudly today," he said. Nell looked once at the pondweed, once at the man who should have died before anyone asked where he had fallen. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. "Perhaps they are afraid of what quiet might reveal." The accusation began not in a drawing room, where cruelty wore gloves, but in the back hall, where servants were expected to receive disgrace without leaving a stain upon the carpet. Nell had been carrying a folded stack of linen toward the service stairs when Miss Gwendolyn Penmere stepped out from the shadow beside the boot room, pale lavender ribbons fluttering at her wrists like small flags of victory. Mr. Cale stood behind her. So did Mrs. Keene, the housekeeper, whose mouth had been pressed thin with worry all morning. Nell knew at once, not because anyone spoke, because Gwendolyn's gaze went not to Nell's face, but to the third cloth from the top, the one whose edge Nell had stitched with two tiny, uneven pulls after Nicholas had placed his trust inside it. "How curious," Gwendolyn said softly. "You are very protective of His Grace's laundry." Nell held the linen more firmly. "It is my work, miss." "Then you won't mind proving it, Mr." Cale extended one white-gloved hand. The linen, Trelawney. For one dangerous second, Nell considered refusing. It would have been absurd. A laundry maid did not refuse the butler before a guest of the family. Her refusal would be treated as guilt before a single thread was turned. She lowered the stack into Mr. Cale's hands. "Carefully, if you please," she said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Keene's eyes flickered. Gwendolyn smiled. "Listen to that. She gives instructions now." Mr. Cale unfolded the top cloth, then the second. When he reached the third, the small steel watch key slid out and struck the flagstones with a sound far too delicate for the ruin it brought. Silence followed. It spread through the corridor and drew people the way spilled wine drew eyes. A footman stopped with a tray. Mary from the laundry appeared near the stairwell. Two house-party gentlemen, passing toward the gun-room, turned back with startled interest. Lady Anther arrived as though summoned by the key itself, her black gown moving without haste. Lord Roderick Penmere behind her, with his brows gathered in practiced concern. Nell looked at the key on the floor. She did not bend to pick it up. A guilty person might snatch. An innocent one might not be allowed to touch proof. "Well," Gwendolyn murmured, "how very unfortunate." Lady Anth's gaze moved from the key to Nell. "Explain yourself." Nell felt the house contract around her. The music had stopped upstairs. No piano, no laughter, no easy cover. Only the back hall, the servants, 2 gentlemen pretending not to relish scandal, and the watch key lying between rank and ruin. His Grace gave it to me, Nell said. The sentence was plain. It sounded impossible, even to her own ears. Gwendolen let out a little breath, almost pitying. A duke gave his private watch key to a laundry maid. Yes, miss. While feverish, Lord Roderick asked. While confined to a cold room after a fall that has left his judgment uncertain. Nell looked at him. He was clear when he spoke. How comforting that you are qualified to decide clarity, Lady Ianthe said. Mr. Cale, who else has touched the key? No one, my lady. Then we are expected to believe Miss Trelawney happened to be entrusted with it. Not happened, Nell said. Her voice remained steady, though her hands had begun to ache from holding them still. Commanded. A low laugh moved through the watching guests. It was quickly smothered, but not quickly enough. Mrs. Keene looked at the floor. Mary's face had gone white. Mr. Cale bent, lifted the key with a handkerchief, and placed it upon a salver as if displaying stolen silver. This key opens His Grace's travel dispatch case, he said. It was not kept among common things. Nothing is common once it passes through ambitious hands, Gwendolen said. The words struck exactly where she aimed. Nell had spent years making herself useful enough to remain unseen. Now everyone saw her, and every eye made her smaller. I have taken nothing, she said. The key was put in my charge. By a man struggling through fever, Lady Ianthe answered. Or by your imagination. Nell lifted her chin. His Grace said that if anyone accused me, I was to say he commanded it. Roderick's expression saddened. That is precisely the danger. Fevered men speak strangely. Servants hear advantage. My lord, Nell said. I heard danger. The hall tightened. Lady Ianthe's eyes sharpened. You forget yourself. No, my lady. Nell swallowed once. I remember exactly what I am. That should have been the end of it. A servant who remembered her station was meant to fold under the weight of it. Instead, the admission gave her something solid to stand upon. She was a maid. She had no fortune, no father living to defend her, no aunt in Mayfair, no brother in the church, but she had been in the cold room. She had held warmth to a dying man's hands. She had heard Lord Roderick speak of a clean succession. She had seen the pondweed and black thread. She did not have power, but she had memory. Lady Ianthe turned to Mr. Cale. Send for Dr. Henslow. His Grace's mental state must be recorded properly. Until then, Miss Trelawney is to be confined to the housekeeper's room. I will not have her carrying private objects through Briar-fell as though rank has lost all meaning. No. The voice came from the corridor beyond them. It was hoarse, low, and thin with pain, yet it passed through the hall with more authority than Lady Ianthe's perfect composure. Everyone turned. Nicholas Ashcombe stood in the doorway that led from the service chamber, one hand gripping a cane, the other braced against Mr. Brixham's arm. His face was colourless. A bandage showed beneath his dark hair. He wore a loose dressing gown over shirt and waistcoat, and even that effort seemed to cost him breath. But his eyes were clear. Nell's heart lurched so sharply that she nearly stepped toward him. She stopped herself. Too many people watched. Too much would be made of one wrong movement. Nicholas saw her stop. Something in his expression changed. Your Grace, Lady Ianthe said, advancing quickly. You should not be standing. No, he replied, I should not. He took one more step anyway. Brixham's jaw tightened, but he did not restrain him, which makes the occasion worth attending. Roderick came forward with both hands raised in careful distress. Nicholas, this is unnecessary. No one wishes to trouble you with servant misconduct. Then stop creating it. The words were quiet. Roderick halted. Nicholas looked at the salver in Mr. Cale's hands. The key is mine. Lady Yanth softened her voice. Of course it is. That is why we are concerned. I placed it in Miss Trelawney's care. No one spoke. The back hall seemed to lose its shape. A footman stared. One of the gentlemen shifted, as if suddenly aware he was witnessing something he might later be required to repeat. Gwendolen's lips parted, then closed. Lady Ianthe recovered first. Nicholas, you must understand how this appears. I understand appearance very well. It nearly killed me. The sentence landed harder than anger would have. Nell saw Lady Yanth's hand tighten at her side. Nicholas turned his gaze to Mr. Cale. Return the key to Miss Trelawney. The butler looked at Lady Yanth. That single glance told Nicholas more than obedience would have. To Miss Trelawney, Nicholas repeated. Mr. Cale placed the salver before Nell. She took the key without allowing her fingers to tremble. It was cold now, colder than when Nicholas had trusted her with it. Thank you, Your Grace, she said. Do not thank me for confirming what I did. His voice roughened. For a moment, pain stole his breath and he swayed. Nell moved before thought. She crossed the space between them, then checked herself an arm's length away. Every rule of class, gender, and propriety snapping around her like threads pulled tight. Nicholas looked down at the gap she had left. The hall watched. Gwendolen watched most keenly of all. Do not step away from truth because they are watching, he said. Nell's breath caught. He extended his hand, not as a lover, not as a man claiming what he had no right to claim, but as an injured duke admitting before servants and guests that he required the steadiness of the woman they had just shamed. Nell stepped close enough to offer her arm. He rested his fingers lightly at her wrist for the space of one breath, no more. The touch was brief, proper in its necessity, and devastating in what it declared. She was not a thief being dragged forward. She was the person he trusted not to let him fall. Miss Trelawney did as I commanded, Nicholas said, his hand leaving her wrist before anyone could turn care into scandal. If there is fault, it is mine. Lady Anth's face had become still enough to frighten. Dr. Henslow must examine you at once. He may examine my head, Nicholas said. He will not examine my honor on Lord Roderick's behalf. Roderick flushed. You are unwell. Very. Nicholas looked at him. And yet I know my own key. A stir moved through the gathered servants. It was small, almost nothing, but Nell heard it. So did Lady Ianthe. Public certainty had cracked the wall she had built around the cold room. Not broken it, not yet. Cracked it. Nicholas's strength failed all at once. His fingers tightened on the cane, but his knees bent. Brixham caught his shoulder. Nell reached for the nearest chair and dragged it forward before Mr. Cale managed to move. Nicholas sank into it, with a breath that sounded almost like defeat. Enough, Lady Yanth said, and this time her calm had a blade inside it. You see, he cannot stand 5 minutes. Dr. Henslow will record that fever has affected his judgment. No responsible household can permit private instructions given under such circumstances to govern serious matters. Nell closed her hand around the watch key. There it was. The next cage. Not theft now. Delirium. If Nicholas could be made unreliable, every truth he had spoken would be turned into proof of illness. Nicholas heard it too. His eyes found Nell's. In them she saw pain, fury, and a warning. The key was not safe merely because it had been returned. Neither was she. Mr. Cale, Lady Anne said, send at once for Dr. Henslow. Tell him his grace has overexerted himself and must be protected from further agitation. Yes, my lady. Nicholas tried to rise again. Brixham bent near him. "Your Grace, don't." The contraction was low, almost a plea. Nicholas stopped, but his gaze did not leave Nell. "Miss Trelawney," he said. Lady Ianthe stiffened. Nell curtsied, the key hidden inside her fist. "Your Grace? Keep it." 2 words, that was all. They sealed her fate more surely than accusation had. Nell bowed her head. "Yes, Your Grace." Gwendolen looked from Nicholas to Nell, and her eyes were no longer amused. They were bright with calculation. Roderick murmured something to Lady Ianthe, too low to hear, but Nell saw the shape of danger moving between them. Mr. Cale hurried away. The 2 gentlemen guests withdrew with expressions of reluctant fascination, already carrying the story into every breakfast, card-room, and carriage in Hampshire. Nicholas sat rigid in the chair, pale as linen, still refusing to look ashamed. Nell stood in the back hall with the watch key in her hand, and every rank in the house turned against her. Yet, for the first time since the rain-soaked night began, she was not invisible. She had been accused before the house. She had been named before the house, and by the Duke's own voice she had been believed. Dr. Henslow's note arrived before the broth cooled. It was carried into the small service chamber by Mr. Cale on a salver, folded once, sealed badly, and written in the careful hand of a man who wished to offend no one with the truth. Nicholas read it, propped against pillows, his face hollow with fatigue after the scene in the back hall. The watch key returned to Nell's keeping, and the cracked, warming brick wrapped beneath his right hand. Lady Ianthe had insisted that the physician's opinion be received as gospel. She had not expected Nicholas to ask for it in writing. His Grace must avoid agitation. Nicholas read aloud, his voice rough but precise. "Judgment may be affected by fever. No private instructions given during the night of his return should be considered reliable without household confirmation." He lowered the paper. Household confirmation, how convenient. Mr. Cale stood near the door, expression smooth. "Dr. Henslow is a respected man, Your Grace. Then he will survive being questioned. My lady thought you should rest. My lady has many thoughts." Nicholas looked at the butler. "Send Brixham to me, and Miss Trelawney." Mr. Cale's jaw tightened by one invisible measure. "Miss Trelawney has been returned to the laundry. Then retrieve her from it. Your Grace, after this morning, it may be thought improper for her to attend you." Nicholas held his gaze until the silence became discipline. It may be thought improper for a household to leave its master in wet clothes upon stone. Yet here we are, surrounded by improprieties. Begin with the one I named. Mr. Cale bowed and withdrew. Nicholas waited until the door closed before allowing his eyes to shut. Pain had become a country he was forced to cross in inches. His head throbbed where the bandage pulled. His shoulder burned when he breathed too deeply. His ribs protested every attempt at dignity. Yet the pain steadied him because it gave shape to what others wished to blur. He had fallen. He had been cold. He had not imagined that. When Nell entered a few minutes later, she stopped just inside the door. Brixham followed and positioned himself in the corridor, leaving the door open enough to satisfy propriety and narrow enough to discourage ears. Nell's cap was neat again. Her sleeves were buttoned, only her eyes betrayed the morning. They had seen too much and stored it carefully. Your Grace sent for me. I did. He lifted the folded physician's note. Dr. Henslow has declared my private instructions unreliable without household confirmation. That seems unfortunate, Your Grace. Something in her tone suggested she had chosen the mildest word available. Nicholas almost smiled, but exhaustion defeated the attempt. I require the dispatch case. Nell's hand moved to the pocket of her apron where the watch key lay hidden. She did not take it out at once. Here, here, if they come in, they'll say I opened it. You will. That won't help me. No, he met her eyes, but it may help the truth. The answer was too honest to be comforting. Nell crossed to the chair where Brixham had placed a small leather travel dispatch case. Dark from use, brass-cornered, the initials N.A., worn but still legible beneath the lock. She took out the small steel watch key and held it on her palm, as she had done before, so he could see exactly what passed from her keeping to the lock. Then she opened the case. The click sounded louder than it should have. Inside lay 3 sealed letters, a folded map of estate coverts, a packet of calling cards, and a riding appointment note written on thick cream paper. Nicholas extended his hand, but the movement sent a tremor through his arm. Nell saw and pretended not to. She lifted the papers one by one and placed them on the small table beside the broth. "Read the top note," he said. She hesitated. "Your Grace? You can read, can you not?" Her stillness answered before she did. "Enough. Read it." Her eyes dropped to the paper. It says, "His Grace will take the Hollow Pond Road at 4, alone. No second groom required. There is no signature." The room changed. Even Brixham in the corridor turned his head. Nicholas stared at the words from where he lay, though they blurred at the edges. "I did not write that." Nell glanced at the hand. "It does not look like the note you dictated for Mr. Armitage yesterday. You noticed my hand from one dictated note. I notice what may later be denied." Brixham made a faint sound that might have been approval. Nicholas looked at her, not with surprise now, but with a grave attention that warmed and frightened her in equal measure. "A useful habit. A servant's habit, Your Grace. Then servants have kept this house wiser than its family." Nell bent her head. Praise still struck like a risk. She set the unsigned note aside. Beneath it was the sealed draft to Mr. Armitage, solicitor in Winchester, still unposted. Nicholas's mouth hardened. "That should have gone before I rode." It did not. Clearly, he closed his eyes for one breath. "Someone knew which road I was expected to take before I took it, or wished you to take it." The words left Nell quietly. Nicholas opened his eyes again. Yes, footsteps approached, then passed. Neither of them moved until they faded. Brixham stepped inside. "Your Grace," I asked in the boot room after the messenger sent for Dr. Henslow. The boy who carried the first call says he was not given the order until after 10. "After 10? Nicholas said. "I was brought in before 7. "Yes, Your Grace." Nell turned toward Brixham. There would be a dispatch stub. Both men looked at her. She colored, but continued. "Mr. Cale keeps them clipped by the boot room hatch when riders or messengers go out. It records time, destination, and who gave the instruction in case a horse is wanted again." Nicholas's gaze sharpened. "Can you reach it?" "Not if Mr. Cale knows I want it." "Then he must not know. I can distract him." "No," Nell said before she remembered to soften it. Brixham's brows rose. Nicholas did not rebuke her. "Mr. Cale would expect you to act for his Grace. He will watch you. He will not watch me if I carry boot cloths and look properly frightened." "Are you frightened?" Nicholas asked. "Yes." Her answer was immediate, but not properly. The faintest breath of amusement moved through him, then disappeared into pain. "Go. Take nothing that cannot be copied or explained." Nell left with a basket of boot cloths. The passage beyond the sick room seemed longer than before, because now every door might hold Gwendolen's listening stillness or Lady Ianth's cold eyes. She kept her head down and her pace ordinary. In the boot room, 2 footmen argued over polish. and Mr. Cale's writing ledgers lay closed near the hatch. The dispatch stubs hung from a small iron clip, just as she had remembered. Nell bent beside a basket, dropped one cloth deliberately, and while retrieving it, turned the clipped papers enough to read the topmost stub. Dr. Henslow, 10:15, sent by order of Lady Ianthe Ashcombe. Her pulse struck hard. She could not take it. A missing stub would shout. Instead, she drew a small laundry slate from her pocket, the kind used to mark counts, and copied the line in tiny strokes with the stub number, time, destination, and name. Then she noticed the stub beneath it. 4 o'clock, stable message. Hollow Pond Road, no second groom. Sent by order of Mr. Weller, stable master. Not Lord Roderick, not directly, but Weller would not move a duke's ride without someone behind him. Nell copied that too. Trelawney? Mr. Cale's voice struck from the doorway. She slid the slate beneath the cloth and rose with the dropped rag in hand. Mr. Cale, you are a long way from linen, Mrs. Keene sent me for boot-cloths. He looked at the basket, then at her face. You have become very fond of errands near important rooms. No, Mr. Cale, I have become fond of not being accused of idleness. His eyes narrowed. For a moment she thought he would search her. Then a bell rang from above, and a footman, called that Lady Ianthe, required the butler immediately. Mr. Cale gave Nell a look that promised this was not finished and left. Nell waited until his steps faded before breathing. When she returned, Nicholas was paler than before, but awake. She placed the laundry slate on the table. The first physician message was sent at 10:15. Lady Ianthe's order. There is also a 4 o'clock stable message naming the Hollow Pond Road and no second groom. Sent under Mr. Weller's name. Brixham swore under his breath, then apologized because Nell was present. Nicholas did not seem to hear. He stared at the slate as if the small chalk marks were knife cuts in the history of his house. 3 hours, he said. They waited more than 3 hours to call a physician. Nell said nothing. Some facts needed no ornament. He looked toward the cracked, warming brick, then at her hands. You held that for hours. It cooled. I warmed it again when I could. Your palms. They are well enough. That was not an answer. The quiet command in him had returned, but this time it did not erase her. It asked for truth. Nell turned her hands over. The skin at the base of her palms was reddened, tender from heat and rough cloth. Not a serious burn, not enough to pity, enough to remember. Nicholas looked at them, and for a moment all the evidence on the table seemed less severe than his silence. May I? He asked. Nell's breath caught. The door stood open. Brixham was in view. Nothing improper could be made of an injured man, examining an injury caused in his service. And yet the question carried a courtesy that reached deeper than propriety. She nodded. Yes, Your Grace. He took her right hand with careful fingers, holding only the palm, as if even gratitude might bruise if handled carelessly. His hand was still cool. Hers was warm. The touch was brief, restrained, and entirely different from the accidental meeting around the broth cup. This time he had asked. This time she had chosen. This hand kept me from the grave, he said. Nell tried to answer lightly, but her voice would not obey. It only held a brick. No, his thumb did not move. He did not caress. He simply held the truth, where both of them could see it. It disobeyed a house that had forgotten mercy. She withdrew first, gently, because if she did not, the room would become too full of things neither of them was ready to name. Nicholas let her go at once. That mattered. It mattered more than the words. Brixham cleared his throat, not unkindly. Your Grace, Tom has been ordered to the lower tenant farm by nightfall. Nell turned. Sent away. Mr. Weller's order. Brixham said. Says the boy is needed there. Nicholas's expression sharpened through exhaustion. He is being removed before he can speak again. Nell closed her fingers around the copied slate. The sting in her palm answered like a vow. Then we must hear him before nightfall. Nicholas looked at her, and the room seemed steadier for it. Yes, Miss Trelawney, he said, we must. By the 5th morning, Briar-fell Park had ceased pretending that Nell Trelawney was merely a laundry maid who had wandered into the wrong corridor. Doors closed when she approached. Conversations thinned into silk-edged silence. A footman, who had once shared heel crusts with her in the scullery, now looked at her hands before he looked at her face, as though the watch key might appear between her fingers and condemn him by proximity. Tom had not been sent to the lower tenant farm after all, but only because Mr. Brixham had placed himself in the stable yard with a message in the Duke's own hand. That had saved the boy for one night. It had not saved Nell. She understood this before Mrs. Keene called her into the housekeeper's room, where the curtains were drawn, though the day outside was grey enough already. Lady Anth stood beside the mantel, gloved hands folded. Miss Gwendolen Penmere sat in the housekeeper's chair as if she had always owned it. Lord Roderick Penmere leaned near the window, looking out toward the wet lawns with a patience that felt rehearsed. On the table lay Nell's cap, her spare apron, and the small purse of wages owed to her for the quarter. No servant needed the sentence spoken after seeing such a display. Dismissal had a language of its own. Miss Trelawney, Lady Anth said, you have made a spectacle of yourself. Nell kept her hands at her sides. Her right palm still carried the tender memory of the warming brick, though the redness had faded. I have done my work, my lady. Gwendolen's smile did not reach her eyes. Is that what it is called below stairs now? Sitting beside gentlemen at night, carrying private keys, whispering about roads and coats. Nell felt Mrs. Keene shift behind the desk. The housekeeper's face had the pinched misery of a woman watching a storm come and choosing which roof she wished to preserve. I sat beside his grace because he was cold, Nell said. I carried the key because he commanded it. So you continue to say, Roderick murmured. And his grace, being injured and vulnerable, has unfortunately been persuaded to believe that command took place exactly as you describe. It did take place exactly as I describe. Lady Ianthe stepped forward. Enough. There will be no argument. Dr. Henslow has advised quiet. Lord Roderick has advised prudence. I advise mercy, though you have not earned it. Nell looked at the purse on the table. Mercy, my lady. You will leave Briar-fell Park today. Mr. Brixham has arranged a temporary place for you with Mrs. Lark near the parish. It is more than many households would do after such conduct. You will be paid what is owed. You will not receive a full character until we have determined how much of your behavior was foolishness and how much was design. The room seemed to tilt. Nell did not reach for the table. She had learned long ago that women without rank were often watched most closely at the instant they were struck. If they staggered, the blow became proof they had deserved it. Does His Grace know? She asked. Lady Anthe's mouth tightened. His Grace is resting. That was not my question. Mrs. Keene made a small sound, almost a warning. Gwendolen rose. Still instructing your betters. How quickly warmth becomes ambition. The word warmth made Nell's fingers curl once against her skirt. She saw again Nicholas's hands around the blue-striped ticking. The way his grey eyes had opened in the cold, the way he had said her name before witnesses. I am not ambitious for anything that belongs to you, Miss Penmere. Gwendolen's colour changed. Roderick turned from the window. Lady Ianthe's voice cut in before either could answer. You will pack only what is yours. Mr. Cale will inspect your box. Mrs. Keene will accompany you. If you attempt to speak with His Grace, you will leave without wages and without hope of future employment. Nell looked at the purse again. It was not generous. It was not even safe. Wages could be explained later as payment for silence. She lifted her chin. I will not take the wages today. Lady Anne stared at her. Do not be theatrical. I will not take money while I am being sent away for having spoken truth. It may be made to look like I accepted payment. The stillness that followed told Nell she had guessed too near something. Roderick's eyes narrowed. Gwendolen's smile vanished completely. Lady Ianthe recovered with a cold little breath. Pride is expensive for a girl with no reference. So is shame, my lady. Mrs. Keene closed her eyes. Nell turned to the table and took only her cap and apron. The apron was not clean. It bore a faint mark where the blue striped ticking had rested inside it. She had already hidden the black waxed thread in the hem of her spare petticoat. The copied dispatch times, rubbed carefully from the laundry slate onto a folded scrap of wrapping paper, lay tucked beneath the lining of her work basket. The ticking itself she had removed from the warming brick before Lady Anthe could send it back to the kitchens. The cracked slate brick remained in the stillroom, too heavy to steal and too visible to move without discovery. But the blue striped cloth, with its slight scorch and the impression of her burned palm, was hers to keep if no one thought cloth worth searching for. They searched for silver. They searched for keys. They did not search for warmth. You have 1 hour, Lady Ianthe said. I need less. Nell curtsied, because dignity sometimes looked exactly like obedience. Then she walked out before her face could betray her. The corridor outside the housekeeper's room smelled of beeswax and damp wool. She had gone only 3 steps when Brixham appeared from the service stair. His expression, usually carved from restraint, was strained. Miss Trelawney. Mr. Brixham. He looked over her shoulder, then lowered his voice. His Grace sent for you. Her heart struck painfully. Lady Ianthe forbade it. His Grace did not. That almost undid her. Not because it saved anything, but because she wanted, foolishly and fiercely, to hear Nicholas say this was not what he intended. She followed Brixham by the narrow passage to the service chamber adjoining the still-room. The door stood open. Nicholas was sitting upright in a chair by the window, pale with the effort. One hand braced over his ribs, the other clenched around the arm of the chair. The cracked warming brick lay on the small table beside him, unwrapped now, its slate split visible like a dark wound. He looked worse than when she had last seen him. He looked more duke than patient, only because pride was doing work his body could not. You are leaving, he said. It was not a question. Nell stopped at the threshold. Brixham remained in the corridor, close enough for propriety, far enough for mercy. I am being sent away, Your Grace. Nicholas's jaw tightened. To Mrs. Lark. So I am told. It is a respectable cottage. She is a widow of good standing. She will not turn you out. Then you knew. The words came quietly. They did more damage than anger would have. Nicholas closed his eyes for a breath. I ordered Brixham to arrange a safe place if the house turned against you. The house turned because truth made it turn, and because my name near yours can ruin you before evidence can save you. So I am to disappear until evidence is polite enough to invite me back. He looked at her then, and she saw the wound land, not in his body, somewhere deeper, where a man accustomed to command discovered that command could injure even when meant as shelter. That is not what I intend. It is what will happen." Her hands shook, so she folded them. "They will say I was removed because I invented what passed between us. They will say I took money. They will say your fever made you generous, and my station made me cunning. I will deny it. From a chair, while Dr. Henslow records your judgment as uncertain," his silence answered. Nell swallowed. She had not meant to wound him with his weakness, but truth had weight, and one could not always set it down gently. Nicholas pushed himself upright, then stopped when pain took his breath. "I cannot protect you here today." "Then do not call sending me away protection." The room went very still. Beyond the door, Brixham shifted but did not enter. Nicholas looked at the warming brick, then at her. "What would you have me do?" The question was raw. It was also late. Nell felt something inside her ache toward him, not with pity, but with the terrible knowledge that he was trying to learn a language no one in his family had taught him. Still, she could not let his effort become another chain around her gratitude. "Ask," she said. "Do not arrange my life through corridors and call it care. Ask." He bowed his head once. The motion was small and full of pain. "Then I ask now. Will you go to Mrs. Lark until I can bring Armitage here and force this into the open?" "That is not a free question. The decision has already been made." "Yes." He did not excuse it. That, too, mattered. And for that I am sorry. The apology touched the room and had no place yet to land. Nell held herself still. "I will go because remaining gives them an easier lie. I will not go because I am ashamed. You have no cause to be. I know." She had not known until she said it. The words steadied her. Nicholas heard the difference. His expression changed, softening around the edges of exhaustion. "Keep what you found. I intend to. And trust no one from the stables except Tom, and not even Tom, if he comes without a sign from Brixham." "Yes, Your Grace." Nell. It was the first time he had used only her Christian name. Not loudly, not improperly, quietly, as a man calling across a space he had helped widen. She should have corrected him. She should have lowered her eyes. Instead, she looked at him, because this might be the last honest moment allowed them for some time. "Yes, I did not mean to make you vanish." Her throat tightened. "Meaning does not always govern harm." "No," he said, "it does not." She curtsied then, not because he was Duke, but because if she stayed 1 second longer, she might forgive too soon, and regret it later. "You should rest, Your Grace. And you should be safe. I should be believed." She left before he could answer. In her small attic space, Nell packed one spare gown, her father's worn prayer book, the folded scrap bearing the copied dispatch times, the black waxed thread hidden in the hem, and the blue striped ticking tucked beneath everything like a piece of stolen weather. Mr. Cale inspected her box and found nothing he valued. Mrs. Keene walked her to the side door, eyes red but dry. "You should have looked away," the housekeeper whispered. Nell tied her cap beneath her chin. "I did that for years." Outside, Briar-fell's stones shone wet beneath a low sky. A pony cart waited near the service yard. From an upper window, pale lavender silk moved and vanished. Nell climbed into the cart without taking the wages. As it rolled down the side drive, she did not look back until the house was half hidden by beech trees. Then she saw one curtain in the service chamber shift. Not much, only enough to tell her Nicholas had risen, when he should not have, just to watch her leave. The sight hurt more than dismissal. Nell placed one hand over the hidden ticking in her box and faced forward. She had been sent away for safety. She would return for truth. The man outside Mrs. Lark's cottage did not knock. That was what woke Nell before the latch stirred. A proper caller knocked, even at a poor widow's door. A messenger called a name. A neighbor tapped glass and apologized through the pane. This man stood in the lane beyond the rosemary hedge, with his cap low and his boots turned toward the stable track, waiting for darkness to make permission unnecessary. Nell lay still beneath the patched coverlet in the tiny room Mrs. Lark had lent her and listened. The cottage had 2 chambers, a narrow stair, and old boards that spoke under any foot. Mrs. Lark slept below, with a poker beneath her bed, and the fearlessness of a woman who had buried a husband and no longer startled easily. Nell did not wake her. Not yet. She rose in her shift, dressed by touch, and took, from beneath the mattress, the folded scrap with the copied dispatch times. The black waxed thread sewn into a loosened hem, and the blue striped ticking wrapped around her father's prayer book. Her box remained under the chair, too obvious. If the man entered, he would search it first. A small sound came from the back lane, not the front. Clever. Nell crossed to the tiny window that overlooked Mrs. Lark's kitchen garden. Beyond the cabbages and dripping bean poles, a figure moved near the fence. He was not large, but he wore the dark green edge of livery beneath a rough coat, Penmere green. Her pulse went cold and clear. She slipped down the stairs with her shoes in one hand. Mrs. Lark's door opened before Nell reached the bottom. The widow stood there in a grey night wrapper, white hair braided over one shoulder, poker in hand. "Back way," Nell whispered. "One at the front, I think. One near the garden." Mrs. Lark did not ask whether Nell was sure. Then out by the coal hatch. "Keep to the church wall. If anyone asks, you came to pray too early." "I am sorry." "Child, don't waste breath apologizing for wicked men's errands." Nell wanted to embrace her. She did not. There was no time, and tenderness could be another delay. Mrs. Lark lifted the iron latch on the coal hatch, and Nell slipped into the wet dark behind the cottage, with her shoes still in her hand. Mud closed cold around her stockings. Behind her, Mrs. Lark raised her voice toward the front door, sharp and querulous. "Who's there? If it's a rat, I've a poker for it." Nell almost smiled as she ran. The church wall lay a quarter-mile from the cottage, its stones slick with moss, its yews dripping from the night's rain. Nell kept low until she reached the lane beyond the churchyard, then put on her shoes and followed the hedge path toward the hollow pond road. She had not intended to go there before dawn. She had intended to wait, think, perhaps send a message through the rector's wife if Mrs. Lark judged it safe. But the men at the cottage changed waiting into foolishness. If Penmere's people were searching already, then something near the road had frightened them. The hollow pond lay in a shallow fold of the estate, where the ground held water even after dry weeks. This morning, mist smoked over it. Reeds leaned black against a pewter sky. Nell saw at once why the official story had chosen the upper meadow instead. The hollow pond road was narrow, rutted, and bordered by thorn hedge. A horse startled here could be driven toward water, stone, and panic. She crouched near the bend where the mud was darkest. No hoofprint remained clear after days of rain, but the hedge had been broken at one point. Branches snapped inward, not outward. Something had forced through from the road. She searched the thorns and found a small scrap of dark green cloth snagged on a hook of blackthorn. Not Briar-fell livery. Penmere green again, with a thin line of yellow braid at the edge. Nell folded it into her handkerchief. "Miss Trelawney?" The whisper came from behind an ash tree. She turned so quickly she nearly slipped. Tom stepped out, cap crushed in both hands, his face grey with fear and lack of sleep. "You should not be here," she said. "Neither should you." Were you followed? I came by the sheep path, Mr. Weller thinks I'm mucking the lower stalls. He told my mother last night that cottages are easy lost when boys speak above themselves. His voice wavered, but he did not run. Nell felt anger rise steady and useful. What did you see? Tom looked at the road, then at the pond. The Duke's own saddle was sound at noon. I brushed it. I know I did. Before he mounted, Mr. Weller sent me to fetch a girth strap from the old harness room, but when I came back, Penmere's groom was near the mare, the tall one. Hasker, he said, Lord Roderick wanted the mare checked quiet-like, on account of his grace being too proud to notice a loose strap. Did you see him cut it? No, miss, but I saw black wax thread on his sleeve, same as the repair binding in the Penmere harness roll. Briar-fell uses brown, always has. Nell drew out the paper twist with the thread from the Duke's coat. Tom's eyes widened. That's it. Be careful. Do not touch it. He pulled his hand back as if the thread might burn him. The saddle was changed after his grace mounted, not before. Hasker came up like he was tightening the girth, but his hand went under, and the mare sidled. His grace was speaking to Lord Roderick then. He didn't look down. And the hollow pond road? Mr. Weller told the second groom to remain by the west gate. Said his grace wanted a solitary ride. But I heard Lord Roderick say, the hollow road is shorter if one is in haste. His grace said he had not chosen his road yet. Nell looked toward the snapped hedge, the black mud, the water weeds shivering in the cold. The shape of it became clearer and more terrible, a false note in the dispatch case. A road Nicholas had not chosen, a saddle tampered with after he mounted, a groom removed, a physician called late, a cold still room with no fire, not one act, but a chain. Tom, she said, will you tell Mr. Armitage this? The boy's mouth trembled. If I do, my mother loses the cottage. His grace said you were not to be sent away. His grace is ill. Lord Roderick walks where he likes. It was true. That was the difficulty with truth. It often stood beside fear and could not move it by force. Nell folded the livery scrap with the paper twist. Then wait, not because you are cowardly, but because a witness must live long enough to speak. Tom's eyes filled with shame and relief together. Miss Trelawney, behind you. Wheels sounded on the lane above. Nell drew back into the hedge shadow with Tom. A covered carriage moved slowly along the road, Brixham walking beside it despite the damp. At first, fear struck her, then the carriage stopped, and Nicholas Ashcombe's voice came from within, strained but unmistakable. Brixham, if you pretend that Rut was impassable, I shall assume you have joined my aunt's campaign to make me ornamental. Your Grace, Brixham said, if you step down too quickly, I shall join Dr. Henslow's campaign to tie you to a chair. Tom vanished behind the ash tree. Nell did not. She stepped out with mud on her hem, wet leaves clinging to her sleeve, and the evidence folded in her hand. Nicholas leaned forward inside the carriage, one hand braced against the frame. He looked shockingly pale in the grey light, a dark coat thrown over his shoulders, a cane beside him, pain carved into the set of his mouth. Yet his eyes found her with such immediate force that everything she had meant to say changed shape. Miss Trelawney, not Nell, not now, not before Brixham and the morning road. The restraint steadied them both. Your Grace, Mrs. Lark sent word through the rector's boy that men came to the cottage. She is unharmed, annoyed beyond Christian patience. Nell breathed once, sharply, and almost laughed. Nicholas saw it. The corner of his mouth moved, but pain took the expression before it became a smile. You came here alone. I left before they could search the cottage. That was dangerous. So was staying where they expected me. He accepted the correction. That mattered. What did you find? She unfolded the handkerchief on the carriage step without climbing in. Penmere livery cloth from the hedge. Tom confirmed Penmere's groom handled the saddle after you mounted. Briar-fell uses brown waxed thread. Penmere uses black. Nicholas looked past her, not toward Tom's hiding place, but near enough to show he understood. Tom is here. He is frightened for his mother's cottage. He has cause. Nicholas's jaw tightened. I should have secured it before asking him to speak. You could not secure everything from a sick bed. No, but I tried to secure you by sending you away. Nell stilled. Brixham looked very deliberately at the mare's harness. Nicholas shifted as if the movement hurt. I was wrong. The apology came without audience, without grandeur, without the protection of command. I thought distance would lessen the scandal. Instead, it gave them room to hunt you. Nell held the damp handkerchief between them. Do not send me away and call it mercy. His face changed, as though the words found the exact wound they were meant to find. I will not, and do not take this evidence and decide alone what must be done. No, he drew a breath. What do you authorize? It was such a strange question from a duke to a dismissed maid that for a moment she could not answer. Then the mist moved over the pond, and the cold road, the hidden boy, the torn cloth, the watched cottage, and the man in the carriage all settled into one hard truth. Send for Mr. Armitage to come to Briar-fell, not me to Winchester. You are too unwell for that journey, and I will not be dragged through town as a servant chasing a duke's favor. Agreed. Protect Tom's mother's cottage in writing before he speaks publicly. Agreed. And when I speak, your grace, do not stand in front of me. A flash of pain crossed his eyes, but not from injury. Beside you, then? She nodded once. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a road. Nicholas looked toward the ash tree. Tom, he said, not loudly, I will not command you to come out, but if you can hear me, your mother's cottage will be secured before your name is used. Nothing moved. Then, from behind the tree, came a boy's broken whisper. Thank you, your grace. Nicholas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they returned to Nell. Will you go back to Mrs. Lark? Yes, by the church wall, not the lane. Brixham will follow at a distance. Nell began to object. Nicholas lifted one hand, not commanding, only stopping himself. May he? The question was small. The change was not. Nell looked at Brixham, then back at Nicholas. At a distance. At a distance, Nicholas repeated. She stepped away from the carriage, evidence hidden once more. Before she turned, his voice followed her, lower than before. Miss Trelawney, yes, your grace, you were braver outside my protection than inside it. The words warmed and hurt together. Nell met his eyes across the muddy road. Then let protection learn from courage. She left him there with the mist and the hollow pond behind her, walking toward the church wall with her head high, while the Duke of Briar-fell sat pale and silent in his carriage and watched, not as a man sending her away, but as one beginning at last to understand how to stand beside her. Mr. Armitage reached Briar-fell Park shortly after noon in a plain, dark carriage that announced neither panic nor vanity. That alone made the house uneasy. Panic could be managed. Vanity could be flattered. A solicitor who entered quietly with a locked leather case and eyes that measured doors, signatures, and silences was a different sort of danger. Lady Anne received him in the morning room with a smile polished, thin as frost. But Nicholas would not meet him there. He had sent word that Mr. Armitage was to be conducted to the linen passage, outside the north still room, where the household traffic could not be entirely stopped. and where no private conversation could be twisted into impropriety without witnesses contradicting it. Mrs. Lark sat at the far end, beneath the tall linen press, knitting with the severity of a magistrate. Brixham stood near the service door. Nell arrived through the side passage, still in the plain gown she had worn at the cottage, her hem brushed clean but not fine, her cap tied with deliberate neatness. She carried the folded evidence in a basket under her arm, the blue striped ticking, the black waxed thread, the copied dispatch times, and the dark green livery scrap from the hollow pond hedge. She did not look like a woman returning in disgrace. She looked like a woman who had decided disgrace belonged elsewhere. Nicholas saw her before she saw him. He had been placed in a high-backed chair near the open door, cane beside him, one shoulder stiff beneath his coat, his face pale from the journey to the passage, though he had crossed only half the house. The effort embarrassed him. Nell knew it by the way his left hand rested too calmly on the chair arm. Pain was easier to hide when every finger was ordered into stillness. "Miss Trelawney," he said. She curtsied. "Your Grace." Mr. Armitage bowed to her not as a servant, not quite as a lady, but as a witness. "Miss Trelawney." That one courtesy unsettled the passage more than an accusation might have done. Two housemaids paused near the linen cupboard. Mrs. Keene appeared at the turn, saw Mrs. Lark watching, and chose not to interfere. Nicholas looked at Mr. Armitage. "You have read the note Brixham sent?" "I have, Your Grace. It was brief enough to be alarming." "Good. Alarm is overdue." Lady Yantha's voice came from behind them. "Nicholas, this arrangement is unnecessary. If Miss Trelawney has information, she may give it to Mr. Armitage through proper channels. There is no need to make a corridor into a tribunal." Nicholas did not turn at once. "This is not a tribunal, not yet." Nell heard the last two words settle into everyone present. Mr. Armitage opened his case, but Nicholas lifted one hand slightly. "Before evidence, I owe Miss Trelawney an apology." Nell went still. Lady Ianthe made a soft sound. "Surely not here." "Here most of all," Nicholas said, and only then looked at his stepmother. The wrong was public enough. Heat rose into Nell's face. "Your Grace, that is not necessary." "It is." His gaze returned to her, and something in it stripped the passage of every listener without dismissing any witness. "I arranged for you to be sent to Mrs. Lark, because I feared what this house would make of your loyalty. I told myself it was protection. It was also command. I decided where you should go, what danger you should bear, and how quietly you should bear it. In doing so, I made you disappear after you had risked yourself to keep me alive." The words did not tremble. That made them harder to receive. Nell had prepared herself for defense, for evidence, for cold smiles from Lady Ianthe, perhaps even for Gwendolen's silken contempt. She had not prepared herself for a duke to name his fault in a passage where servants could hear. Mrs. Lark's needles stopped moving. Mr. Armitage lowered his eyes to his papers with tact. Brixham stared straight ahead. Nell's fingers tightened on the basket handle. "I accept that you intended safety," she said carefully. "I do not accept that intention is the same as respect." Nicholas bowed his head once. "Nor do I." Lady Ianthe's voice sharpened. "This is indulgent." Mrs. Lark looked over her knitting. Truth often sounds that way to people accustomed to managing it. A footman coughed into his glove. Lady Ianthe's eyes flashed, but Nicholas spoke before she could. "Miss Trelawney, I will not ask for trust as if apology has purchased it. I will ask what terms allow you to stand in this matter without being used by it." The question moved through Nell slowly. Ask. He had remembered, not arranged, Not declared, asked. She set the basket on the linen press between them. First, no evidence moves without my knowledge unless there is danger in the room and no time to consult me. Mr. Armitage's brows rose slightly. Nicholas said, agreed. Second, if I am questioned before others, I speak for myself. You may stand beside me. You may not answer before I have answered. Lady Ianthe turned away with a laugh under her breath. Nicholas did not look away from Nell. Agreed. Third, Nell said, and now her voice had to cross a harder place. There is to be no courtship born of gratitude, no rescue made into romance, no kindness that leaves me indebted in another form. The passage fell utterly quiet. The word courtship, spoken by a dismissed maid in the hearing of a duke, should have sounded absurd. It did not. It sounded like the necessary naming of a danger everyone else had hoped to exploit or deny. Nicholas's face changed. Pain moved there, and something warmer, and something more disciplined than either. Agreed, he said, and if courtship is ever asked, it will be asked when you are free to refuse without fear for your name, your bread, or your truth. Nell felt the answer in her chest before she trusted it with her mind. It did not sweep away injury. It did not undo side door, the searched box, the silence of people who had once shared her table below stairs, but it made a space in which her anger did not have to stand guard alone. Mr. Armitage cleared his throat gently. Then, Miss Trelawney, if you are willing, I should like to see what you carried from Mrs. Lark's cottage. Nell unfolded the blue striped ticking first. She laid it flat, showing the slight scorch and the faint, darker place where her warmed hands had pressed it over the cracked slate brick. This wrapped the warming brick I used the first night. The brick itself, still in the north still-room when I left. His Grace saw it. Lady Ianthe saw it. Nicholas said, it remains there under Brixham's watch. Mr. Armitage nodded. Next came the black waxed thread from the riding coat, the copied dispatch times, and the dark green livery scrap. Nell described each plainly. No embellishment, no trembling, when she repeated Tom's fear for his mother's cottage. Nicholas reached toward the small writing board Brixham had placed beside him. That is already prepared. He took up a folded paper, sealed with the Ashcombe crest. Tom's mother holds her cottage by Briar-fell lease, not Penmere favour. This confirms security of tenancy so long as ordinary rents and duties are kept. No steward, stable master, or visiting relation may threaten removal. He placed the paper on the linen press, not before Mr. Armitage, but before Nell. Read it if you wish. The offer mattered. Nell took the paper. Her schooling had been irregular, borrowed from a father who taught parish boys by day and his daughter by candle-end at night. But she read every line. Nicholas waited. No impatience, no humiliation disguised as courtesy. It says what you said, she murmured. Then Mr. Armitage will hold a copy, and Tom's mother will receive one before he is asked to speak publicly. Thank you. The words came before she could stop them. Nicholas's gaze softened. For once, Miss Trelawney, that is something I did after asking. It was not quite a smile. It was better, a memory of how trust might begin again, cautiously, with witnesses and paper and humility. Lady Ianthe moved at the end of the passage, her restraint fraying at last. Nicholas, you are placing household order beneath the judgment of a girl who was dismissed for cause. No, he said, I am placing household order beneath evidence. It should have been there all along. Gwendolyn's voice drifted from the stair before she appeared, sweet with approaching trouble. How touching. A linen passage full of moral philosophy. I do hope Miss Trelawney has saved some eloquence for supper. She stepped into view in pale green silk, her smile bright enough to be mistaken for innocence by those who preferred convenience. Lady Iantha thought it best that our guests hear matters plainly. Miss Trelawney should have the opportunity to answer for herself. Nell understood at once. A supper was not an inquiry. It was a stage. Tables, candles, county eyes, a dismissed maid placed before people trained to smell scandal before truth. Nicholas's hand tightened on the chair. He began to speak, then stopped. Nell saw the effort. He had promised. Beside, not before. Slowly, he turned his hand palm upward upon the arm of the chair, not reaching for her, not summoning, offering. The passage seemed to narrow to that hand, and the choice it left untouched. Nell looked at it, then at his face. Pain had drained him. Restraint held him upright. Apology had not made him less powerful, but it had made room for her power to stand near his without being crushed. She placed her hand in his, not for balance, not for display, for one sustained breath of agreement. His fingers closed around hers carefully, neither gripping nor claiming. Warmth passed between them, quiet and human, with Mrs. Lark watching, Mr. Armitage pretending not to, and Lady Ianthe learning that not every bond could be ordered away. "Then I will stand beside you," Nell said, her voice low enough for him first, and the passage second, "but not behind you." Nicholas held her hand one moment longer, then let go before the house could dirty the gesture. "Beside me," he said. Gwendolen's smile sharpened. How brave. Supper, then. Nell picked up the evidence and returned it to the basket with hands that no longer shook. The scandal was coming. This time, she would not enter it as a servant being dragged forward. She would enter as the woman who had stayed, remembered, and chosen the terms upon which truth would be spoken. The supper table at Briar-fell had been laid with such care that no one could pretend the evening was accidental. Silver branches of candles ran down the polished mahogany. The old Ashcombe plates had been set out, blue and white beneath each folded napkin. County guests who should have been sent home days ago sat with expressions of disciplined curiosity. All of them, knowing something had gone wrong in the house, and all of them too well bred to say so before being fed. Nell stood near the sideboard with Mrs. Lark seated behind her like a severe guardian angel, and Mr. Armitage at the lower end of the room, his leather case closed beside his chair. She had not been dressed as a guest. She had not been placed among the servants either. Lady Ianthe had chosen the cruel middle ground, where a woman could be displayed without being welcomed. Nicholas sat at the head of the table because no one could prevent him from doing so. Though his face was pale, and the hand nearest his cane remained clenched beneath the cloth, Brixham stood behind him, close enough to catch him if pride failed. Lord Roderick Penmere occupied the chair to Nicholas's right. With the grave patience of a man awaiting a verdict he believed he had arranged. Gwendolen sat halfway down the table in pale green silk, bright as a poisonous leaf. She smiled at Nell only once. It was enough. The courses passed with almost no taste in them. Soup, fish, a remove of fowl. Each dish arrived as if the kitchen had not heard its own future standing in the room. Gwendolen waited until the servants had withdrawn after the second remove. Then she touched the stem of her wineglass and said, "Your Grace, since Miss Trelawney has been granted such remarkable latitude in your household, perhaps it would be kinder to let matters be aired plainly rather than whispered through corridors." Nicholas's gaze lifted. Kindness has not been the leading habit of this house lately. A fork paused in Lady Ianthe's hand. Gwendolen lowered her eyes with practiced humility. "Then let us call it clarity. Lord Roderick sighed. Nicholas, no one here wishes to shame the girl. Mrs. Lark made a sound that might have been a cough if anyone wished to be generous. Nell kept her hands folded at her waist, the basket containing the blue striped ticking, the black thread, the copied dispatch times, and the livery scrap rested at her feet. She did not touch it. Not yet. Miss Trelawney, Lady Ianthe said, has made several claims that place this family in a painful position. We have borne them out of concern for His Grace's weakened state, but a new matter has come to light. Gwendolen drew a folded paper from the little embroidered case beside her plate. She did not hand it to Nicholas. She handed it to Mr. Armitage, which was clever. It made the act appear proper. This was found among papers sent from Mrs. Lark's cottage, she said. A note in Miss Trelawney's hand, or a remarkably persuasive imitation of it, asking for money and passage abroad in exchange for silence regarding her private attendance upon His Grace. The room altered. It did not gasp. Aristocratic rooms rarely gave scandal that satisfaction. Instead, the guests became very still, as if every candle had leaned toward the flame of accusation. Nell felt the words strike her reputation before her mind finished arranging them. Money, passage abroad. Silence, private attendance, 4 blades laid in a row. Nicholas's chair shifted. He had begun to rise. Then he stopped. Nell saw the effort it cost him. His jaw tightened, not with doubt, but with the violence of restraint. Beside, not before. He remembered. Gwendolen saw him stop and mistook it for uncertainty. Her smile softened. It grieves me to produce it, truly. But mercy must not become blindness. Nell looked at the folded note in Mr. Armitage's hand. May I hear the words? Lady Ianthe's eyes narrowed. You deny knowing them. I cannot deny or answer words I have not heard. Mr. Armitage unfolded the paper. His face revealed nothing. It reads, If His Grace wishes the matter of the cold room kept from county gossip, I require the sum promised and a place in a household abroad. I will not be named as the woman who sat with him in the night, unless I am made secure. It is signed, N. Trelawney. A murmur moved, tiny and fatal. Nell felt Mrs. Lark stiffen behind her. From the end of the table, a lady in grey lowered her eyes, as if pity were already safer than belief. Lord Roderick spoke with sorrow. You see the difficulty. A girl may begin with impulse and end with appetite. It is regrettable, but not rare. Nicholas's fingers moved against the tablecloth. He did not speak. Nell drew one breath, then another. The room wanted tears from her, or anger. Either would be useful. Tears would make her weak. Anger would make her insolent. She gave them neither. If I wanted reward, she said, why did I keep the coat from washing before I knew whether he would live? The room went quiet enough to hear rain beginning again against the windows. Gwendolen's eyes sharpened. Nell bent, lifted her basket, and placed it on the side table near Mr. Armitage. She removed the blue striped ticking first and unfolded it. The cloth looked plain beneath the candles. That was its power. It had no ornament, no jewel, no crest, only a faint scorch, a darkened place where heat and hands had marked it, and one corner where her hurried stitches remained uneven. This wrapped the warming brick used the first night, she said. I kept it when I was sent away because cloth is easier to overlook than truth. Lady Ianthe's mouth tightened. A theatrical relic proves nothing. It proves I was not planning a bargain before morning, Nell said. It proves I used what I had before I knew His Grace would wake, before I knew he would speak my name, before I knew there was any evidence of anything except cold. She placed the black waxed thread beside it. This came from the seam of His Grace's riding coat before Mr. Cale's order to wash it. Tom saw similar thread on Penmere harness binding. Roderick leaned back. A servant boy frightened by a clever woman. The coat also held pondweed, Nell continued. The upper meadow has chalk and stone. The hollow pond road has black mud and weeds. If my ambition began in the still room, my lord, did it also plant water weeds on the Duke's coat before he was carried past me? One of the county gentlemen looked sharply toward Roderick. Gwendolen's smile thinned. You speak very boldly for a woman accused. I was accused when I spoke softly. The answer left Nell before fear could stop it. A silence followed. It was not friendly. It was listening. Mr. Armitage lifted the forged note and studied it beside the copied dispatch scrap Nell had given him earlier. Miss Penmere, he said mildly, from whom did you receive this letter? It was sent under cover. By whom? A maid carried it. Which maid? Gwendolen looked toward Lady Ianthe. That single glance was small, but not small enough. Nicholas saw it. Nell saw that he saw it. Still, he let Mr. Armitage continue. The paper is of fine quality, the solicitor said. Not impossible for Miss Trelawney to obtain, but unlikely. The fold is also interesting. Visiting writing cases often leave a particular crease when paper is stored beneath the blotter. Gwendolen's expression cooled. Surely you do not claim to know every crease in England, Mr. Armitage. No, Miss Penmere. Only the ones in the evidence before me. Roderick set down his glass. This is absurd. A dismissed laundry-maid produces scraps, mud, and gossip, and now an entire family must endure cross-examination at supper. Nicholas spoke at last. His voice was quiet enough that everyone had to lean toward it. You arranged the supper. Roderick's color rose. To preserve order. Order appears to dislike questions. Nell looked at Nicholas then, and for one dangerous second the room fell away. He had not rescued her. He had not overridden her. He had waited until she had placed her own truth before them. That waiting had cost him. It showed in the pallor beneath his skin, in the tension around his mouth, in the hand that remained near his cane rather than reaching for hers. It was the first time anyone powerful had trusted her voice enough not to replace it. Gwendolen must have sensed the shift, because she rose halfway from her chair. Your Grace, I fear your generosity has been used. You were cold, injured, dependent. A girl in such a position might confuse pity with opportunity. Nell turned to her fully. I did not ask him for pity. No, Gwendolen said. You asked for something better, a story. The words were meant to shame her before every eye present. Nell let them stand for a breath. Then she answered. If I wanted a story, Miss Penmere, I would have chosen one in which a man's family answered when he was dying. The silence struck harder than any raised voice. Lady Ayan stood so abruptly that her chair scraped the floor. Enough. Nicholas tried to rise, but Brixham's hand touched the back of his chair. This time Nicholas remained seated. He did not need height to command. Not enough, he said. Not nearly. Mr. Armitage folded the alleged letter with care. I will retain this with your Grace's permission. You have it. And the paper should be compared with the writing materials available to the Penmere party. Gwendolen's face went white, then bright with anger. You insult me. Evidence often does, Nicholas said. Lord Roderick pushed back from the table. I will not sit here while my daughter is accused by implication. Nell looked down at the blue-striped ticking and the black thread lying beneath candlelight. Her hands did not shake now. Then sit here because I was accused directly. A sound passed through the room. Not applause. Not approval. Something better for the moment. Recognition. Mrs. Lark's needles resumed their work with one sharp click. Lady Ianthe stared at Nell as if seeing Perhaps, for the first time, not a maid who had forgotten her place, but a woman who had found it and would not be moved from it. Nicholas's eyes met Nell's across the table. He said nothing. He had promised not to speak over her, and he kept the promise even when every instinct in him strained against it. That silence was not abandonment now. It was faith. Gwendolen gathered her embroidered case with fingers that trembled once. This evening has become vulgar. Nell folded the ticking and returned it to the basket. No, miss, she said softly. It has become specific. And in that specificity, the supper of false mercy began to turn against those who had set the table. Morning found Briar-fell Park divided between those who wished the supper forgotten and those who understood it had begun something no polished lie could stop. The county guests remained because Lady Ianthe could not send them away without admitting disorder, and because Mr. Armitage had quietly asked 2 gentlemen and the rector to stay as witnesses to the handling of evidence. That phrase, handling of evidence, had moved through the house like smoke. It reached the servants' hall by breakfast, the stables by 9, and Lord Roderick Penmere's rooms before his valet had finished packing his shaving case. Nicholas heard of it from Brixham, while standing with one hand braced against the mantel in the small service chamber, willing his ribs to obey him. "You are not fit for the stables, Your Grace," Brixham said. "I was not fit for the back hall, supper, or most of my childhood," Nicholas replied. "Briar-fell has survived my unfitness before. Your Grace, wit does not mend bone. No, but silence has nearly murdered me. My cane." Brixham looked as though he might refuse. He did not. A valet who had served a duke since youth knew the difference between foolishness and necessity, though he objected to both with equal dignity. By the time Nicholas reached the East Service passage, Nell Trelawney was waiting with Mrs. Lark beside her and Mr. Armitage ahead. She had returned the blue-striped ticking and black waxed thread to the solicitor's evidence packet after supper, but she carried herself as if the truth were still in her hands. Her eyes moved at once to Nicholas's face, then to the cane, then away, before concern could be mistaken for a claim. He saw the restraint and felt it more sharply than tenderness would have struck him. "Miss Trelawney," he said, "Your Grace, if I slow the inspection, you will not soften the facts to spare me." One corner of Mrs. Lark's mouth moved. Nell answered without hesitation. "I have not been sparing you so far, Mr." Armitage coughed into his glove. Nicholas almost smiled. "Then we proceed safely." The stables lay beyond the covered passage, still damp from the night's rain, smelling of straw, leather, oats, and fear. Men looked busy where no work required such speed. Mr. Weller, the stable master, stood outside the tack room with his arms folded, his face red above a stiff collar. Tom kept near the lower stalls, small and pale, watching Nell as if her presence alone kept him from bolting. Nicholas stopped just inside the yard. Pain crossed him in a cold wave. Nell saw it. She did not move toward him. Instead, she turned to Brixham. "There is a mounting block 3 steps behind His Grace." Brixham's eyes flickered with gratitude. Nicholas lowered himself onto it as though choosing the position for strategy rather than necessity. "Mr. Weller," he said, "the stable chalkboard. Washed this morning, Your Grace. It had become smudged. How unfortunate that smudges are so punctual in this house." Mr. Weller's jaw worked. "Daily practice, Your Grace." "Then Miss Trelawney will look at it." A visible ripple moved through the yard. A laundry maid inspecting stable records was not merely improper. It was insulting to every man who believed his authority had more weight than her eyes. Nell seemed to feel the ripple pass over her and chose not to bend beneath it. "May I, Mr. Armitage?" The solicitor nodded. With witnesses present, Nell crossed to the board mounted beneath the tackroom overhang. It had been washed, certainly, but hurriedly. Water had streaked the lower rail where chalk dust gathered under the wooden lip. She did not touch the main surface first. She crouched, ignoring the damp straw near her hem, and looked beneath the rail. "There is chalk trapped here." Mr. Weller gave a short laugh. "Chalk on a chalkboard. Remarkable." Nell did not answer him. She took a clean scrap of dark cloth from Mrs. Lark and pressed it gently beneath the ledge. White marks came away. Not words entire, but fragments. A tall, upright stroke, a curve, a smear that might have been the tail of a letter. Tom leaned forward despite himself. "That's where Mr. Weller wrote Hasker," he whispered, then clapped his mouth shut. Nicholas looked at him. "Come here, Tom." The boy obeyed in 2 trembling steps. "You are not accused," Nicholas said. "You are asked." Tom's breathing eased a little. "It was Hasker, your grace, Penmere's groom. His name was there beside the mare for 4 o'clock. Then it was gone after you were carried in." Mr. Weller rounded on him. "You lying little rat." Nicholas's cane struck the stones once, not loudly. "Enough. You will address no witness in my yard again unless invited." The stable master froze. Nell rose, holding the chalk-marked cloth. "There may be more in the saddle-room ledger." "There is nothing improper in my ledger," Mr. Weller snapped. "Then you will be eager to have it read." Mr. Armitage's mildness had begun to sound dangerous. The ledger was brought from the office with visible reluctance. Its pages smelled of leather oil and damp fingers. Nell did not take it from the stable clerk. She asked that it be placed on an upturned feed chest, where all could see. That, Nicholas noticed, was the change in her. Before, she had hidden proof to preserve it. Now she arranged truth, so no one could pretend it had been whispered. Tom pointed to the mark he had copied from the saddle-room ledger, a small notation beside the mare's tack entry. It should have listed the Duke's own brown-bound girth. Instead, the line had been scraped and overwritten. Beneath the fresh ink, a darker impression remained. Mr. Armitage bent close. "P.H. Roll," he read. "Penmere harness roll?" Brixham asked. Tom nodded. "Hasker brought it," Mr. Weller said. "The boy sees ghosts in ink. Better ghosts than lies in ledgers," Mrs. Lark said from behind Nell. A muffled sound came from one of the grooms. It vanished when Weller looked his way. Nicholas's strength was thinning, but anger steadied what flesh could not. "Where is the girth?" Mr. Weller spread his hands. "Destroyed, your grace. It was damaged in the fall." "By whose order?" "Mine. Unnafe tack is not kept." Nell turned toward the old harness racks at the back of the room. "Unsafe tack is sometimes kept if it must be mended later or accounted for." Mr. Weller's face changed. Too quickly, Nell saw it. So did Nicholas. "Behind the old cart harness," she said. "That is where things are put when no one wants them underfoot, but cannot throw them out at once." Mr. Weller stepped into her path. Laundry has no business in the harness room. Nicholas began to rise. Pain caught him, but his voice reached the man first. "Move." Mr. Weller moved, not out of respect, out of calculation. Nell entered the harness room with Mr. Armitage beside her, Brixham at the door, and Tom close enough to see without touching. The room was narrow and low-beamed, crowded with leather, brass, hooks, and the dry animal smell of long use. Nell went to the old cart harness because she had learned in laundry that forgotten corners held the most honest dirt. Behind a cracked collar and a coil of mildewed strap lay a wrapped bundle. Mr. Armitage opened it. The saddle girth inside had been cut almost through before breaking. The severed place was too neat for accident, the remaining threads darkened with wax. Black wax, not brown. Tom made a small sound. Mr. Weller said nothing. Nicholas stood in the doorway now despite Brixham's quiet protest, one hand braced against the frame. The sight of the girth drained the last denial from the yard. Even men who did not love their master understood tack. They knew what strain looked like. They knew what knife or worried thread could do. "It was not the fall," Nicholas said. "No, your grace," Mr. Armitage replied. "It was prepared before the fall." From across the yard, Lady Ianthe's voice cut through the stable air. "This has gone quite far enough." She entered beneath a black cloak, Gwendolen behind her, Lord Roderick at her side. The three of them looked painfully elegant among straw and mud, as if the stable itself had behaved indecently by existing. Roderick's eyes moved once to the opened bundle and stopped. That pause was almost a confession. "Nicholas," Lady Ianthe said, "you are humiliating your house before grooms." "My house survived being truthful before grooms for centuries," Nicholas said. "It is recent management that finds honesty degrading." Gwendolen looked at Nell. "And you are content, Miss Trelawney, to make yourself spectacle again." Nell held the chalk-marked cloth, then placed it beside the cut girth. "No, miss. I am content to make the evidence visible." "Evidence?" Roderick's voice was cold. "A cut strap hidden where any servant might place it. A thread no one can swear was not carried in your pocket. A frightened boy coached by those who prefer drama to discipline." Nicholas stepped forward before Brixham could stop him. His face went white, but he remained standing. "Tom's mother's cottage is secured by my written order. No one here may threaten it. No servant is to be dismissed, removed, reassigned, or denied character while this matter is examined. That includes Miss Trelawney." Mr. Weller's head jerked up. Lady Ianthe's mouth tightened. "You cannot govern a household through suspicion. Watch me." The two words carried across the yard with such cold authority that even the horses seemed to still. Nell looked at Nicholas then, not as an injured man, not as a title, but as someone who had heard her and changed an action because of it. He had not seized her evidence. He had not hidden her from the room. He had written the cottage guarantee before asking Tom to speak, and now he put his name between the servants and punishment. It was not romance in any pretty form. It was better suited to where they stood among tack and mud and frightened witnesses. It was respect made practical. Nicholas turned to Mr. Armitage. "Take the girth, the chalk cloth, and the ledger into your keeping." Then he looked at Nell. "With Miss Trelawney's confirmation that the items are correctly listed." A murmur crossed the yard. Nell stepped forward. "The black thread from the coat is already with Mr. Armitage. The girth should be wrapped separately. The chalk cloth must not be folded against damp leather. The ledger page should be copied before anyone tries to correct it." Mr. Armitage inclined his head. "A sensible chain of custody," Mr. Weller muttered. "Chain of laundry." Nicholas looked at him. "Mr. Weller, you are suspended from authority in these stables pending inquiry." The stable master stared. "Your Grace, I served your father." "Then you should have learned loyalty better." Lady Ianthe drew herself up. "This performance has exhausted you. Return inside." In a moment, Nicholas's eyes had fixed on the far archway, where an empty peg held a strip of dark green thread caught on splintered wood. "Where is Hasker?" No one answered. Roderick adjusted his glove. Too slowly, Mr. Armitage turned to the grooms. "Penmere's groom." "Where is he?" A stable lad near the pump whispered. "Gone before dawn, sir. Took the east road." Nell saw Roderick's face close like a shutter. Nicholas gripped his cane. The proof had multiplied, but the man who could bind it all together had vanished. Above them, from the open gallery windows, a bright peal of laughter floated down from the remaining guests, brittle and out of place. Nell looked at the cut girth on the cloth, the scraped ledger, the chalk ghost of a name, and the empty road beyond the yard. Nicholas followed her gaze. "He will not outrun the truth," he said, but his voice was strained, and everyone there knew the truth still had to catch him. By dusk, the stables had surrendered nearly everything except the man who had fled. Hasker was gone down the east road with a hired mount and a groom's bag, but Mr. Armitage had already sent a careful rider after him with authority from Nicholas, and a note for the nearest magistrate's clerk. The cut girth lay wrapped separately in clean cloth. The chalk-marked rag had been dried flat beneath Mr. Armitage's eye. The ledger page had been copied twice, one copy sealed by Nicholas, one kept by the solicitor. Tom's mother had received her cottage guarantee before sunset, delivered by Brixham himself and read aloud by the rector, because fear should never be forced to trust a paper it could not read. All of it should have brought relief. Instead, as the evening lamps were lit throughout Briar-fell Park, Nicholas found himself drawn back to the one room where evidence had begun as breath, stone, and cold. He left Brixham at the passage turn after enduring one grave protest, then crossed the last few yards alone with his cane. Each step jarred his ribs. His shoulder pulled beneath the coat. Pride wished to call the pain nothing. Memory knew better. The north still-room door stood partly open. Someone had scrubbed the floor. The preserve shelves had been wiped. A fresh lamp burned where no lamp had been left the first night. The room looked orderly now, which was almost obscene. Order had become the house's favorite disguise. Nell stood near the table with her basket at her feet, looking at the empty settle where he had nearly died. The cracked, slate-warming brick rested inside her basket, returned to her after Mr. Armitage had listed it, and Brixham had carried it down from the service chamber. Without the blue stripe ticking, the brick looked plainer, darker, more broken. "Miss Trelawney," Nicholas said. She turned quickly, then checked the instinctive concern in her face. "Your Grace, you should not be standing alone." "No." He closed the door no farther. It remained open to the passage where Mrs. Lark's low voice could be heard speaking to Brixham around the corner. "I have been told that several times today." "Then perhaps one day you'll believe it." The faint edge in her voice steadied him more than softness. He leaned on the cane and looked at the scrubbed stones. "They cleaned it." Nell followed his gaze. "Yes, as if soap could correct intent. Soap is often asked to do more than it can." He tried to smile. It failed. The room held him too tightly. He could feel again the wet weight of the coat, the cold climbing from stone through bone, the tremendous distance between music and mercy. "I keep thinking," he said, "that I should remember more." Nell did not move closer. About the fall, about being carried in, about who stood where. "I remember my aunt's voice. I remember the word quiet. I remember wanting fire and being unable to form the order." His hand tightened over the cane. A duke who cannot command fire in his own house is not much of a duke. A man near death should not have to command it. The answer came without hesitation. He turned toward her. In the lamplight, she looked tired, not fragile. Tired in the way courage looked after being asked to stand all day before people who wished it would sit down and be sensible. "You always put the truth where I cannot step around it." "I learned that if truth is placed politely in a corner, People mistake it for decoration. His breath caught, partly from pain, partly from the sharp grace of her. Tomorrow, Armitage means to place everything before witnesses. The rector, Dr. Henslow, 2 county gentlemen, servants who handled the coat and tack, Tom, if he is willing, if Hasker is found, him too. And Lady Ayan? She will attend. Lord Roderick, he is trying to leave at dawn. Will you stop him? Yes. He looked back at the cold table, this time not quietly. Nell knelt and lifted the cracked warming brick from the basket with both hands. The red marks on her palms had faded, but he saw memory there. She set the brick on the table between them. Then this should be there. Armitage has listed it, not as a curiosity. Her voice lowered, as the reason you lived long enough to ask questions. Nicholas stared at the broken line across the slate. All day, the larger evidence had occupied him because it could be measured. Thread, girth, chalk, ledger, testimony. But this object accused in another language. It did not prove who cut the saddle. It proved what happened after the fall. It proved that his household had possessed warmth and withheld it. I have been thinking of it as gratitude, he said. The brick? You. She went still. The open doorway seemed suddenly essential. So did the distance between them. He did not cross it. I thought if you saved my life, then I owed you safety. Money, a character, protection, something large enough to answer what you did. And now I think debt is another way to make the person who saved you carry weight. Her face changed, quietly. Yes, the word was almost a breath. He looked at her because not looking would be cowardice. I am afraid, Nell. Her name stood in the room, softer than her title and more dangerous for it. He waited for correction. She did not give it. Of Lord Roderick, she asked. Of him, of my aunt, of what they made this house without my seeing it. But not only that. He drew a slow breath because the next truth required more courage than exposing villains. I am afraid that whatever I feel for you will become another command if I speak it badly. I am afraid my title will stand too near you. I am afraid gratitude will sound like love, and that love from me will sound like a door closing. Nell's hands rested on the edge of the table. Her fingers did not tremble. I am not afraid of your love, she said. The word love entered the cold room and changed the air before either of them claimed it fully. I am afraid of being swallowed by your gratitude, your title, or your guilt. I am afraid of waking one day to find everyone says I must be happy because a duke chose me, whether I can breathe inside that choosing or not. Then I will ask, he said, not command, not arrange through corridors, not shield you into silence. I will ask. The still room was quiet enough that he heard Mrs. Lark cough gently from the passage, not intruding, only reminding the world that propriety still had a chair nearby. Nell looked toward the open door, then back at him. And if I say no, then no will be honored. His throat tightened, even if it empties every room in Briar-fell. She stood on the far side of the table with the cracked brick between them. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Nicholas wondered whether this was the moment he had asked too much, even by saying too little. Then Nell stepped around the table, not quickly, not as a girl overcome, as a woman choosing the ground beneath her feet. She stopped before him, close enough that he could see the faint mark where heat had once reddened her palm. You are shaking, she said. Pain, not sentiment, both can be true. That almost broke him, not because it was tender, but because it was accurate. He lowered his head, and the motion cost him. May I stand here? He asked, rough with restraint. Or is even this too near? She answered not with words first, but with action. She stepped into him carefully, mindful of his ribs, and placed her arms around him with a gentleness that did not ask him to be less wounded. The embrace was not dramatic. It was not a collapse. It was a decision. Her cheek rested briefly against his uninjured shoulder. His free hand lifted, stopped, and waited until she did not move away. Then he held her, lightly at first, then with the reverent steadiness of a man touching not possession, not rescue, but permission. "Choice, Nell," he whispered. "Always choice. Then I choose not to let you stand alone in this room tonight." His eyes closed. For one breath, the cold room lost its power. He did not kiss her. He did not speak the love that had risen too near the surface. Tomorrow would demand truth before witnesses, and she deserved to hear any vow after the world had stopped calling her a liar, so he held only what she had freely given, then released her when she stepped back. She moved first. He let go at once. That too was part of the promise. Outside the room, Brixham cleared his throat with elaborate discretion. "Your Grace, Mr. Armitage has received word from the East Road." Nicholas turned, every line of him tightening. "Hasker." Brixham appeared in the doorway. "Found at the Bell and Hart Inn, Your Grace. Injured from a fall, frightened, and willing to speak if protected from Lord Roderick." Nell looked at the cracked warming brick on the table. Nicholas looked at her. The night before the reckoning had given them not peace, but something stronger. A truth chosen before it was safe. "Then tomorrow," Nicholas said, "the house will hear what it tried to bury." The covered carriage yard at Briar-fell Park had never held so many witnesses in such complete silence. Rain threaded down from the eaves beyond the open arches, darkening the cobbles and silvering the wheels of the carriages that had been drawn back to make space for tables, chairs, and truth. Mr. Armitage had arranged everything with a solicitor's quiet cruelty toward disorder. Upon the long tack table lay the cut saddle girth wrapped in clean cloth, the black waxed thread from Nicholas's coat, the riding coat itself with its preserved seam and dried trace of pondweed, the chalk-marked rag from beneath the stable board, the copied stable ledger page, the delayed physician dispatch, stub, the forged reward letter, a sheet from Miss Penmere's visiting writing case, and, nearest the front, the cracked slate warming brick now wrapped again in Nell's blue-striped ticking. It looked humble among paper and leather. That made it harder to dismiss. Nicholas stood beside the table with Brixham close at his left, a cane in his right hand, and pain held so fiercely in check that Nell wished the world were kinder than to require wounded men to stand in order to be believed. But she did not reach for him. She stood where she had asked to stand, not behind him, not shielded by his rank, but at his side with Mrs. Lark and Mr. Armitage near enough to prove that propriety and courage could occupy the same ground. Lady Irons sat beneath the overhang in black silk, her face arranged into injured dignity. Lord Roderick Penmere stood near the far pillar with one hand on the head of his cane, gloved fingers too still. Gwendolen, pale and beautiful, had chosen green silk again. It made the scrap of Penmere livery look almost indecent beside the evidence. The rector was present. Dr. Henslow was present, nervous and grey. 2 county gentlemen, 3 senior servants, Tom, Mrs. Keene, Mr. Cale, and half the stable staff stood in a careful half-circle, every class in the estate forced at last to breathe the same air. Mr. Armitage began without flourish. "This inquiry concerns the injury to his Grace, Duke of Briar-fell, on the Hollow Pond Road, and the conduct of the household after his return." Lady Ianthe lifted her chin. An inquiry held in a stable yard is a humiliation to this house. Nicholas looked at the cut girth. This house mistook polished rooms for innocence. We will try the yard. A low movement passed through the servants and died. Mr. Armitage pointed first to the riding-coat. Miss Trelawney, when did you first observe pondweed and black mud? Nell stepped forward. When his grace was carried past me on the night of his return, I confirmed it before the coat was washed. And why did that matter? Because the official account placed the fall near the upper meadow. The upper meadow gives chalk and stone. The hollow pond road gives black mud and pondweed. Roderick gave a thin laugh. A laundry maid's geography. Nell turned to him. Yes, my lord. Laundry learns what gentlemen leave behind. The answer struck cleanly enough that even one of the county gentlemen looked down to hide his mouth. Mr. Armitage lifted the black waxed thread. Tom was called next. The boy trembled, but did not retreat, because his mother's cottage guarantee had been read aloud before witnesses that morning and placed with the rector. Briar-fell harness uses brown waxed thread, Tom said, voice small but audible. Penmere's roll used black. Hasker handled the mare after his grace mounted. I saw him go under the girth. Roderick's cane struck the cobbles. A boy frightened into repeating servant gossip. No, my lord, the new voice came from beneath the arch. Hasker was brought in by Mr. Armitage's rider and the magistrate's clerk from the nearby town, limping slightly, cap in hand, face bruised from his own fall on the east road. He looked not at Roderick, but at Nicholas. I'll speak if I'm not given back to Lord Roderick. Nicholas said, You are under my protection until the magistrate's clerk has your statement. Then I changed the girth. Hasker said, words tumbling now that fear had found an exit. Lord Roderick said his grace only needed a fright and a fall, said the horse would shy at the hollow bend, and no one would trace the strap if it was taken back quick. Mr. Weller knew. I was to hide the girth and collect it after the fuss passed. Mr. Weller made a strangled sound. Roderick stepped forward. Lies bought by a duke desperate to make illness into conspiracies. Nicholas did not move. The ledger. Mr. Armitage held up the copied page. The stable record shows the Penmere harness roll entered and then scraped over. The erased chalkboard carried Hasker's name. The dispatch case contained an unsigned instruction directing his grace to the hollow pond road, without a second groom. That instruction was not in his grace's hand. Gwendolen's voice cut in, bright and brittle. None of that concerns Miss Trelawney's conduct. It concerns why you needed to disgrace her, Nicholas said. Mr. Armitage placed the forged reward letter beside a sheet from Gwendolen's writing case. The paper matches the Penmere party's stock. The fold matches the inner compartment of Miss Penmere's case. The phrase "made secure" appears in an earlier note in Miss Penmere's hand regarding household arrangements. Gwendolen went white. Coincidence. Nell looked at her. Coincidence is very industrious in your family, miss. Lady Ianthe rose then, smooth mask cracking. This is vulgar persecution. A young lady's writing paper, a groom's panic, a maid's scraps. Nicholas, you will regret making your blood answer to servants. Nicholas reached for the cracked warming brick and rested his hand upon the blue striped ticking. My blood left me in that room. The yard went still. He looked to Dr. Henslow. When should you have been summoned? The physician swallowed. At once, your grace. A man brought in soaked, concussed, and chilled should have been warmed carefully, stripped of wet clothing, and watched. When were you summoned? After 10? By whose written order, Mr.? Armitage lifted the dispatch stub. Dr. Henslow closed his eyes. Lady Ianthe's. Every face turned. Lady Ianthe stood very straight, but something in her expression had emptied. I was preserving calm. Nell stepped forward then, not loudly, not angrily. My lady, when I said his coat was soaked, you told me to go. Lady Ianthe looked at her as one might look at a candle that had burned too near a curtain. You were a servant. Yes, Nell's voice remained steady. And because I was a servant, I knew cold kills the poor before it troubles the polite. Mrs. Keene covered her mouth. Mr. Cale stared at the cobbles. Nicholas looked at his stepmother. Why no fire? For the first time, Lady Ianthe's composure failed before everyone, not in tears, in contempt, because fire meant servants rushing, doors opening, guests hearing, scandal spreading. Because if you died quietly, Briar-fell would pass into hands that understood management. Roderick would have guided the estate. Gwendolen could have steadied the house. Instead, this girl turned a chill into a melodrama. Roderick lunged verbally before his body moved. Ianthe. The admission had gone too far. Everyone knew it. Mr. Armitage turned to the magistrate's clerk. You have heard. The clerk nodded. Grave. Roderick tried to leave the circle. Nicholas's voice stopped him. You arranged the saddle. You cannot prove intent to kill. No, Nicholas said, but I can prove sabotage, delay, intimidation of witnesses, and conspiracy to suppress evidence. Let the proper authorities decide how clean your succession looks now. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Roderick's cane lowered. He seemed suddenly older, smaller, trapped not by force but by witnesses. Nicholas turned to the gathered yard, and his voice roughened. My family left me to die in the cold. Nell Trelawney stayed. No one moved. Then Tom bowed his head. Mrs. Keene began to cry soundlessly. One of the county gentlemen removed his hat, though they were under cover. Nicholas looked at Nell, and she saw not gratitude alone, not debt, not rank reaching down, but recognition. He said before all of them. She was accused because she remembered what others hoped to erase. Any character given against her from this house is void. Any servant punished for speaking today will answer directly to me. Briar-fell will record her name as witness, protector, and the reason its master lived to correct it. The words entered the yard like sunlight after rain. Lady Ianthe sat down as if her bones had been cut. Gwendolen stood frozen, her future collapsing behind her eyes. Mr. Armitage spoke the consequences plainly. Roderick would be held for formal examination and debt inquiries. Hasker and Weller would give statements under protection. Gwendolen's forged letter would be shown to her father's solicitor and to the families before whom she had spread her insinuations. Lady Ianthe would remove to the dower house under written restriction, with no authority over Briar-fell servants, correspondents, physicians, or household orders. It was not theatrical vengeance. It was better. It was structure rebuilt where cruelty had hidden inside custom. Only when the witnesses began to disperse did Nicholas sway. Brixham caught his arm. Nell took one step, then stopped because the yard still watched. Nicholas saw and shook his head slightly, not in refusal but in promise. Later, when Mr. Armitage had sealed the evidence and the magistrate's clerk had gone with Roderick under escort, Nicholas found Nell on the covered terrace beyond the carriage yard. Mrs. Lark sat within sight near the door, pretending to examine a torn glove. Rain had softened into mist. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nicholas said, "May I stand beside you?" Nell looked at him. "You already did." "May I do it when no one is accusing you?" Her breath caught. Yes. He came no closer than propriety allowed until she turned fully toward him. "May I kiss you, Nell?" The question trembled more than his voice had before the yard. Nell stepped closer herself. "Yes, Nicholas." He bent carefully, mindful of his injury, and kissed her with a restraint so tender it felt less like claiming than coming home to permission. When he drew back, his eyes held hers. "I love you, Nell Trelawney. Not because you saved me, but because you saw the man when the title could not save itself." Tears warmed her eyes, but her voice was clear. "And I love you, Nicholas, not for Briar-fell, but for the man who learned to ask." He closed his hand around hers only after she offered it. Behind them, the yard still smelled of wet leather, rain, and broken lies. Ahead of them, nothing was simple. But nothing true was hidden now. Several months later, the north still room at Briar-fell Park was the warmest room in the servants' wing. That fact would have astonished anyone who had seen it on the night. Nicholas Ashcombe was carried home, soaked, shivering, and unwanted by those who should have guarded him first. The stone floor had not been torn out, for Nicholas had said a house should not pretend its wrongs had no foundation. Instead, a thick turkey rug now lay across the center where the settle had stood. The shelves that once held jars and cold shadows had been scrubbed, repaired, and filled with folded linen, clean blankets, jars of calf's foot jelly for the sick, and neat packets of tea kept for servants who had sat up through the night with another's pain. A small iron stove glowed safely in the corner, inspected every week under orders written in Nicholas's hand and countersigned by Mrs. Keene, who had remained only after standing before the household and admitting that fear of Lady Anth had made obedience out of cowardice. She was no longer mistress of every key. No one at Briar-fell held that much silent power now. Keys were listed. Physician calls were recorded. Messenger stubs were copied. Servant characters could not be withheld without written cause. Tom's mother kept her cottage, and Tom, taller by pride if not yet by inches, had been apprenticed properly under a new stable master who taught tack repair in daylight, not secrecy in corners. Lord Roderick Penmere's name had vanished from invitations with a speed that society pretended was tact. His debts, once whispered over card tables, had become matters of public record and bitter consequence. Hasker had given his statement and received protection enough to leave Penmere service. Mr. Weller was gone. Gwendolen Penmere had been removed from every respectable scheme of alliance by the one punishment she feared most. People still received her, but never trusted her near a writing case. Lady Anne lived at the Dower House 3 miles away, where her correspondence passed through Mr. Armitage's supervision, and her authority ended at her own garden gate. No one called it exile. Everyone understood that it was. On the mantel of the transformed still-room rested the cracked slate warming brick, bound now with a narrow brass band and wrapped once more in fresh blue striped ticking. Nicholas had wanted it placed in a glass case at first. Nell had refused. "It isn't a saint's relic," she had told him. "It kept hands warm. Let it remember its work." So it remained uncovered, useful in appearance, though no one used it now without permission. Not because it was fragile, but because it had become the one object every person in the house knew how to read. It said cold could be ordered. It said warmth could disobey. It said a maid's hands had once done what rank had failed to do. That morning, pale winter sun lay across the brass band when Nell entered the room, not through the servant's stair, but through the central passage beside Nicholas. She wore a travelling gown of deep blue wool, plain enough for comfort, and fine enough that every maid she passed tried not to stare. A modest ring, newly placed upon her hand in the chapel that same morning, caught the light when she removed her gloves. The ceremony had been small by ducal standards and large by truths. Mrs. Lark had stood beside her. Mr. Armitage had signed as witness. Brixham, implacable until the final blessing, had turned away at exactly the moment his eyes grew suspiciously bright. No Penmere had been invited. No one had asked whether a duke should marry a woman who had once carried his linen. The county had already asked too many foolish questions and received too many public answers. Nicholas walked more steadily now, though his shoulder still stiffened in damp weather and his ribs reminded him of storms before rain reached the windows. He had refused the great breakfast in the dining room until he had brought Nell here first. "I thought you might want to see it before the house sees you again," he said. "As Duchess." Her voice was quiet, not uncertain, only testing the shape of a word that society had placed above her like a crown and a challenge. "As Nell," he said, "the rest will learn to follow." She looked at him then, and the years between laundry steam and ducal silk seemed not erased, but honored. "You have become careful with words. I had a severe tutor." "Did you?" She used mud, pondweed, and moral instruction. "I was too weak to escape." Nell laughed softly, and the sound moved through the room like a window opened after winter. Nicholas watched her with the same restraint he had learned, beside pain, scandal, and truth. Even now, when the vows had been spoken, he did not treat her nearness as something owed. That had been his courtship, not roses in every room, though he had sent flowers once and been told kindly that a woman raised among linen preferred useful things, not jewels, though the Ashcombe vault had yielded more than enough to silence lesser imaginations. He had courted her with questions. Would she prefer Briar-fell or a smaller house for a time? Which servants did she trust to remain? What work should be done first? Did she wish Mrs. Lark near her? Did she wish to write to Cornwall? Did she want the story softened in society or spoken plainly? Each question had laid one stone in a road neither rescue nor gratitude could build. Nell crossed to the mantel and touched the blue-striped ticking with 2 fingers. "I used to think a house like this knew warmth because it had so many fires." Nicholas came to stand beside her, leaving space until she chose otherwise. "And now I think warmth is whether the lowest person in it can be cold without being blamed for shivering." He bowed his head. "Then Briar-fell still has work to do." "Yes," she turned to him, "but now it can begin without lying about where it failed." He looked at the cracked brick, then at her hand, the hand he had first asked to hold when its palm still bore a mark from saving him. The mark had faded. He knew where it had been. "I have something for you," he said. "Nicholas, not diamonds. That is a relief." From his coat pocket, he drew a small folded paper. Nell took it and opened it carefully. It was not a settlement, not a grand declaration, not another document written over her life. It was the first page of the new Briar-fell household book. At the top, in Nicholas's hand, stood a rule written plainly. No order concerning sickness, dismissal, character, correspondence, or household discipline shall stand if it requires silence from the person most affected by it. Beneath it, there was space for another signature. Nell read it twice. "You want my name here? I want your judgment there. Your name only if you choose." She looked at him for a long moment, then took the pen from the mantel-stand and signed, "Nell Trelawney Ashcombe." The ink shone wetly, then settled into the paper as if it had always belonged. Outside the open door, footsteps paused. Mrs. Keene stood there with 2 younger maids, all 3, pretending they had come for linen, and not for the first sight of the new Duchess in the room that had once held the family's shame. Nell saw their nervous curtsies, their curiosity, their hope. She did not make them suffer under it. Mrs. Keene, she said. The blankets for old Martin at the South Lodge should be warmed before the cart leaves. And Mary should take tea before she goes back to the copper. She has been on her feet since dawn. Mary's eyes widened. Mrs. Keene curtsied again, this time with something steadier than habit. Yes, Your Grace. Nell flinched only inwardly at the title. Nicholas saw, of course. He saw most things now, not because he was suspicious, but because love had taught him attention without command. When the servants had gone, he offered his hand, palm upward, always a question. Nell smiled and placed her hand in his, closing her fingers first. You may hold it, she said. I hoped so. You may also kiss me. The warmth in his eyes deepened. I'm grateful for such clear household instruction. Do not become impertinent on your wedding day. Never. He bent and kissed her hand where the burn had once been, then looked up. May I kiss you properly, Nell? She stepped nearer in answer, free and unhurried. Yes. His kiss was gentle, brief, and filled with all the words they no longer had to hide from witnesses, rank, or fear. When he drew back, she rested her forehead near his shoulder for one quiet breath, careful of the old injury and certain of the new life. I love you, she said, not because this house learned to bow, but because you learned to listen. Nicholas closed his hand around hers. And I love you, not because you stayed when I was dying, but because every day since you've shown me how to live without making love another command. Together they looked at the cracked warming brick, the open household book, the winter sun on folded linen, and the doorway through which any servant might now enter without fear of being unheard. The room that had nearly stolen his life had become the first room in Briar-fell where warmth belonged to everyone, and beside the mantel, hand in hand, Nicholas and Nell chose the home they would keep making, not from silence, not from gratitude, but from truth freely spoken and love freely returned.